Good afternoon, Minister Jason Luan, distinguished participants, members, and friends. I'm Xiping Wen, President of Chinese Professionals and Entrepreneurs Association of Calgary, or CPEC. On behalf of CPEC and its Entrepreneur Club, I would like to extend my warm welcome to all of you in this 2021 Alberta Energy Transition Forum. Our deep appreciation goes to Honorable Minister of Community and Social Service of Alberta, Mr. Jason Luan, our forum honorary chair, for his continued support. We are thankful to Dr. Max Wen, our forum program chair, for his personal dedication. I truly thank all the industry experts who come to share their knowledge for the benefit of all of us. First, please allow me to introduce the forum organizer, Chinese Professionals and Entrepreneur Association of Calgary, or CPEG. CPEG is a nonprofit organization established in 1998. It's the largest association of Chinese professionals, entrepreneurs, business people, and community leaders in and around Calgary area. One of the key missions of CPEG is to foster professional information exchanges and development among members and in the communities. This association is run solely by volunteers. I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you again to all of our volunteers and supporters. Without you, we won't be able to make this event happen today. Thank you. Countries around the world are united in transitioning to a future based on sustainable energy. Here in Alberta, the energy landscape has been shifting dramatically, with renewables challenging the long-term survival of Alberta's energy sector. But with change comes opportunity. One of the core purposes of this forum is to discuss how Alberta Oil and Gas Company can adapt and reposition themselves in the energy transition quickly, find a niche, the benefit from the low carbon economy by leveraging Alberta's abundant natural resources and strong innovation spirit. As reflected in the agenda, this forum is focused on hydrogen energy and new bitumen applications, the needs, the technologies, the logistics, the challenges, and solutions. I'm confident that today's discussions will bring us new insights and expand our horizons. I wish you all the best in your deliberations and learnings over the next few hours. I hope that you will gain new perspectives, establish new networks, and develop innovative solutions to the many challenges Alberta is facing. Next, I would like to introduce Honorable Minister of Community and Social Services of Alberta, Mr. Jason Luan. He's also the MLA of Calgary Foothills. We are very delighted that Jason accepted our invitation to be the forum honorary chair and is with us today. Thank you again, Jason. Now let's welcome Mr. Jason Luan to say a few words to mark this occasion.
Thank you, President Wang Shiping, and thank you for the kind introduction. I want to join you to acknowledge your team of volunteers and your board of directors led by you and George Young, Vice President, Corinne, Vice President, and many others. Thank you for continue to offer this very important forum, helping many experts to connect and bridge their knowledge. And I also want to thank every volunteers who joined for helping this forum, including speakers, and also know our common friend, Dr. Max Wang played a significant role in contributing for this year's forum. So my heartfelt thank you goes to all of you. I also want to mention that the past president, Cecilia Chen, not only she hosted so many of previous forums, but I believe she is an advisor to the current board and has been doing a lot of work supporting all of you behind the scene. So thank you all for another hero behind the scene that make today's event a reality under such a difficult and challenging situation. It is my greatest pleasure to come back to join you again. I believe this is the 7th year of Energy Forum. And some of you know that I was one of the co-founders for this forum since its inception in 2013. You also know that Premier Jason Kenney came to one of our last one and spoke very enthusiastically about the importance of this forum and the way the bridge and connection it provided for our community. Despite that today his schedule doesn't allow him to join us, he asked me to bring his greetings and thanks to all of you for continuing volunteering this important work in our community. Recently, I've been watching the Business News Network, and when I noticed the excitement news about seeing $80 barrel oil price increase and natural gas is hovering around $5 per gigajoule. This is great news. Just a short several months ago, those prices are way below the current one. So that's a sentiment of some hope and some positive messages coming to our way. However, that's not the only industry thriving in Alberta. I know today our topic is energy transition and hydrogen has been picked as a subject. Let me share a few highlights from the provincial point of view about our plan to develop these new areas of energy. Alberta has been known for our rich resources, our rich experience and high technology. We are the expert recognized around the globe for producing the most responsible energy as a unique jurisdiction. And as I speak to you today, I hope that you will sense the great pride that we have within our province in terms of our strong entrepreneurship, innovation, and the dedication to bring us the best place and poise Alberta as a global leader and global supplier for clean hydrogen for decades to come. Between our large natural gas reserves, expert workforce, and our geology, which is well suited to carbon capture utilization and storage, Alberta is already an attractive investment place for international hydrogen-focused companies. We've had a number of companies announce the hydrogen project recently in our province. This includes ATCO, Suncor, Mitsubishi, Air Products, Petronas, and Shell. And most recently, Dow's historical petrochemical announcement also contains a large hydrogen component. And Calgary TC Energy recently unveiled plans to build hydrogen refueling stations near major transportation hubs across North America. As these projects getting underway, we'll continue to build our expertise in hydrogen production, and Alberta's much anticipated hydrogen roadmap will be unveiled in the coming weeks in November. And this is a comprehensive strategy to grow the hydrogen sector and position Alberta for significant hydrogen exports by 2030. The global hydrogen sector is still in its early days, but we believe it can be a big part of the global drive to low emissions and provide people with safe and reliable energy. And our goal is that Alberta become the preferred global supplier of hydrogen. As we know, we are the most responsible jurisdiction to produce such valuable commodity. As I just mentioned a second ago, I want to talk a little bit more about the Dow's announcement, big announcement. It happened not by accident. It happened because a lot of work went away from that. And Dow's announcement became the largest investment in Alberta's economy in more than a decade. It is a huge win for job creation, economic growth, and Alberta's economic recovery plan. If this project received regulatory approval, which we anticipate, and a positive final investment decision, which is beyond $1 billion, it will lead a multi-billion-dollar investment in our economy and a huge job opportunity in both construction and operation phases. Dow's decision to build the world's first net zero carbon emission hydrogen complex in Alberta is a proof that our open for business policy have made us one of the most competitive places on earth for this kind of major investment in cutting edge technologies. After years of declining investment in our province, we can now say that Alberta's advantage is coming back. Alberta's government has worked very closely with Dow since the spring of 2019 to land this huge project. This announcement is good news, both for our traditional energy sector and for energy diversification. Major petroleum projects like this one create long-term additional demand for Alberta's natural gas, which in turn will create jobs in the exploration and service sector. At the same time, the expanded services will further diversify our economy, bring a whole bunch of other related jobs along the way. With Dow's commitment to net zero production, this project will highlight Alberta's growing reputation as a hub for low emission industry technology. Friends, there's so much to be hopeful in Alberta's energy sector. The US portion of Enbridge Line 3 replacement is almost done. That will bolster pipeline takeaway capacity this year. And the Trans Mountain expansion is already on track for completion by the end of next year. Rebound in prices and production has boosted cash flow and strengthened producers' financial position. After a slow start, drilling activities is picking up in Alberta. Rig counts exceeded 2019 level in August for the third straight month. Oil production in Alberta rose nearly 8% in the first 7 months of this year. Thanks to a quick rebound in bitumen output, it has recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Those gains are expected to lift sustaining capital in a non-conventional energy sector. After falling an estimated 30% last year, oil and gas investment is forecast to grow 22%, reaching $20 billion this year. Friends, this isn't happened by accident. This is all part of a broader picture of economic recovery that we've been working very hard behind the scene. Our plan to create jobs and diversify our economy is paying big dividends, start seeing the results. Alberta's our recovery plan. Our plan is a bold, ambitious, long-term strategy to build, diversify, and create jobs in our province. It's a plan for today that provides hope for the future. And it's made in Alberta solution that will help our province rally the overcome challenge that was in the past several years and create opportunities across all sectors to become economic recovery again in the coming months and years to see. Alberta has regained nearly all job losses since the pandemic began. The province has added more than 90,000 jobs since the beginning of this year. Alberta's GDP is expected to grow by 6.7% in 2021, up significantly from the budget forecast of 4.8%. The Conference Board of Canada and the major banks expect Alberta to lead all provinces in Canada in growth this year. Well, we all know, of course, that energy products drive the growth of this province, but other industries related to energy will flourish along the way, adding even more to our GDP significantly this year. Calgary and Edmonton are on track to break record for venture capital after setting new record in 2020. The film industry is booming too in Alberta. Actually, just yesterday I was in Edmonton. I was kicked out of my office as the HBO series producing a film called The Last of Us. This film will bring 2,000 jobs right here in our province. The Last of Us production is estimated to bring in upward of 200 million in revenue to Alberta, and is being called the largest TV production in Canadian history. We are without doubt going to an experience of economic rebounds in Alberta, thanks to those policies that we created. And Alberta today is one of the most tax competitive jurisdictions in North America. These are barriers to overcome, but together we will never stop fighting and never stop showing the world that Alberta is capable of doing. Thank you again for inviting me to join you today and share some of the key messages from the province and from our Premier. And once again, I want to thank all of you for continue working in this sector, building the forum, becoming the bridge, exchange expertise and knowledges, and helping our economy recovery. Thank you again. I want to wish this year's forum another success. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for your time and support and the wonderful news shared with us. Very inspiring. Okay, thank you, Jason, again. And next, I would like to introduce Forum Program Chair, Dr. Max Wen. Max's professional career spans engineering, management of major projects and companies. In his last two executive roles, he was president and CEO of Grand Cache Coal in Alberta and managing director and CEO of Altrum Coal Limited in Australia with assets in British Columbia and Alberta. Prior to that, Max was the director of engineering major projects at Suncor Energy and engineering manager of oil sands projects at Petro-Canada. Max was the past chairman of the board for the Coal Association of Canada and a technical committee member of 21 years for 3 Canadian national standards. He has also been a board member of private and public energy companies in Canada and Hong Kong. Now let's welcome Max.
Thank you very much, Shiping, for your kind introduction. It's absolutely my honor to help organize this forum and to be here today with 6 academic and industry leading experts and a large audience to discuss 2 key subjects about the energy transition, that is hydrogen and bitumen beyond combustion, where I think that our traditional oil and gas industry, including oil sands, may have a significant role to play and have a huge potential as well. Here is the program and the speakers on the screen again. Corinne, please share 2 slides. Before we get started, I would like to mention that everyone is encouraged to ask a question or provide a comment. I'm sure there are other experts in the in the audience, and your comments would enrich our discussions for sure. Please use the Zoom Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to type in your comments and questions anytime during the session. If your question has already been posted, you can use the vote up button to support the question, and we will give priority to those questions asked by multiple people. At the end of each presentation, we will try to provide an opportunity to answer 1 or 2 questions depending on the schedule, and the remainder may be addressed during the panel discussion period. Wei will be helping me with bringing the questions to the speakers. My experience tells me that this session will likely run till 5:30. I hope you guys are okay with it. Without further ado, let's move onto our presentation. And let's give our podium or screen, in our case, to our first presenter, Professor Amit Kumar, who among many distinguished roles and responsibilities is the Associate NSERC Industry Research Chair in Energy and Environmental Systems Engineering, and the Deputy Director of Future Energy Systems, a $75 million federal research program. Aside from numerous journal publications and books, he has authored or co-authored more than 500 conference and other presentations, more than 130 of which were invited. We are truly very, very privileged to have him as our first speaker today. Dr. Kumar's presentation is entitled of Hydrogen in Alberta's Energy Transition. Amit, please.
Thank you, Max. It's a privilege to be here. And thank you for CPAC for providing me this opportunity to share some of our work. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is in terms of the way we see the role of hydrogen in Alberta's energy transition and the potential for hydrogen in Alberta. As Honorable Minister pointed out, Alberta has the potential of becoming a world leader in hydrogen production and export. And there is already a lot of activity and investment recently announced in this domain. The work that we have done at U of A, this has been kind of the result of a number of different contributors, so I'd like to acknowledge them in my research group. What I wanted to touch base on a little bit, talk about Alberta's energy system, and then focus on the key production pathways for Alberta, looking at some of the transport options, and specifically talk about the result of 300 different scenarios that we ran for integration of hydrogen in Alberta's demand sector. And then finally talk about a little bit on the export opportunity and the key niche areas. Conclude with some key observations. So this one, we have been now looking at, probably it's almost 15 years when we developed this first time, this Sankey diagram. But this is showing that the whole energy picture of Alberta, what you have in terms of all the sources, how much they produce, it goes through a conversion, and then you have the demand sector. The key to look at here is in terms of the major energy consumer. Look at industry, a major energy consumer, 66% of our energy. And then 88% of that is through natural gas. A big chunk, of course, is the export also, which is basically crude oil and then also natural gas. But these sectors are huge sectors. In terms of if you translate it to the GHG emissions associated with these, the oil and gas industry, almost 54%, and a major, again, portion of that comes from the natural gas consumption. So again, what these shows us is that there is a potential of, if we can move these energy consumption or these sources to more cleaner sources, if there is a possibility. And that's where some of the roles of hydrogen is, which we'll talk about a little bit. And the other key demand sector would be transport sector, about 12% of the emissions coming from the transport sector. So clean hydrogen is critical for future of energy economy, as we see a lot of focus on this, and this being one of the key sources which is of interest around the world. From Alberta's perspective, there is a lot of potential of producing hydrogen, specifically based on natural gas. So we talk about blue hydrogen, where you capture the emissions associated with the production of hydrogen. And then also renewable hydrogen, which you can produce from wind and solar, and then taking it to electrolysis. So the key issues and questions is in terms of feedstock for hydrogen production, what level these technologies are, so technology readiness level, and then the environmental economic performance, because that dictates a lot of decision making, and also the policy formulation. If you just look at the hydrogen demand and supply for whole of Canada, and this is projected demand, which is looking at different regions across Canada, and then where these are being used. So a major portion of this, 81% of the Canadian hydrogen currently produced, is in the Western region, and majority of them, 57%, is in oil sector. So we are already consuming a lot of hydrogen, although this is gray hydrogen, where we are not capturing the CO2 emission during its production. And then the other major one is the chemical sector. So we already are ahead from a lot of jurisdiction in terms of consumption, production of these hydrogen, and especially gray hydrogen. If you look at the hydrogen system itself and how this integrates the different parts of the energy system, so you have hydrogen production, then these production is based on a number of different processes, all the renewables, and this could be from a range of these different sources. And around the world, there is work and interest in these different types of sources of renewable or green hydrogen production. Gray hydrogen is predominantly a natural gas-based hydrogen. And then a number of these pathways for producing blue hydrogen, where you produce hydrogen from natural gas, but different processes and capture that CO2, which can take you to blue hydrogen. Now, once you have produced it, it has to be transported. There are a number of different options which are being explored. And then you have demand sector, which goes into a residential, commercial, power sector, industrial sector, including oil sands, another industrial sector, transportation. And then for Alberta, export is also key, because 50% of our natural gas we export. And so if there is an opportunity of transitioning this export in terms of blue hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, that is an opportunity. And then within Canada to different provinces. And we look at it from a number of different key indicators, where you look at economic impact, system-wide impacts, the cost to produce this and to supply this, in GHG abatement potential, and in the current scenario where you have carbon price has an impact on this too. So the whole hydrogen system consists of a number of these different pathways, and this is complex. So for natural gas, typically the blue hydrogen production, there are 4 major pathways, and these are all coupled with carbon capture and storage to produce blue hydrogen. The key here that I want to emphasize that this is SMR, which we have been doing for a long time. We have been producing hydrogen. The key here is that when we try to capture hydrogen, you can go all the way to 95%, but typically we do 60 to 95%, 60% is the baseline case. And capturing this hydrogen both 2 points in the reformer as well as during the purification and separation. The second one is the ATR, which is autothermal reforming. It's still coming up, the new technology, not a lot of commercial scale development here in Canada yet. But this is a promising technology. The carbon capture is pretty high. You can go all the way to more than 90% here. The next one is the natural gas pyrolysis, where basically you separate and break down natural gas into hydrogen and solid carbon. Now, solid carbon provides an opportunity for other uses too. This technology is, again, potential here in Alberta, but is still in development stage. And then the last one is in terms of where we have been focusing also on is we call it the chemical looping or partial oxidation of methane. And then here you can go all the way to 91% carbon capture. And the focus here is, again, producing hydrogen with high amount of carbon capture. And then renewables, we have been looking at renewables, and there is a lot of work on the renewable side where you have electricity produced from any of these wind, solar, hydro plants passing through the electrolyzer and producing hydrogen. Biomass-based hydrogen, a little bit different in terms of the renewables. Here, the solids or biomass, I refer to any of the wood, forest-based or agricultural-based biomass, take it through gasification, and then produce hydrogen. We also have looked at underground coal gasification, and this is for coal which you can't, which is deep down, and basically the gasification takes place underground to produce hydrogen. We do have emerging technologies, which is in terms of the nuclear and solar PV splitting, still early developing stage. So here again, you look at electricity being used through electrolysis to produce hydrogen and oxygen. Another key aspect in these is water is a feedstock, which is critical because you need to have water to produce hydrogen from any of these renewable-based sources. And then this is talking about the biomass side, and you have the nuclear plant, which is still coming up, but has the potential in terms of producing steam, electricity, and then those could be used for producing hydrogen. This is a snapshot of summary of a lot of work that we have done, and then contribution from a number of different researchers. This just shows you the summary of all the sources that we have considered and the pathway which is there. In terms of hydrogen supply, the cost of producing these, you see these SMR plus CCS as well as ATR plus CCS to autothermal reforming, producing blue hydrogen. This plays a key role and it has the lowest cost. And this is, we are looking at producing about 200,000 tons of hydrogen a year. And then the rest of the sources are higher in cost. And so this is a potential where the Alberta's advantage, it could be explored here with the natural gas resource and already large scale hydrogen production plants in progress. CCS, where we are, we have demonstrated it and we are ahead of other jurisdictions in showing the CCS technology. So this is a key potential. In terms of the life cycle GHG footprint, you look at here, SMR plus CCS has the high kg of CO2 per kg of hydrogen production, but ATR CCS is attractive in terms of the overall. Of course, this is higher than the renewable-based hydrogen, but in terms of looking at long-term maturity and then lowering the GHG footprint, we look at some of these newer technologies have potential. The transportation one, there are a number of different modes and the opportunities needs to be explored, but large scale hydrogen transportation is basically you're looking at pipeline transport for transporting large scale over longer distances. This, I don't want to get into the details, but this basically what shows is the large scale transport is predominantly, you're looking at pipeline transport. And what we have looked at in terms of range of these options, the gaseous hydrogen through pipeline in form of compressed gas up to a certain kilometers is economical compared to the other forms. The LOHC, the liquid organic hydrogen carrier, is still in development stage. And then you have high-tane where you blend it with natural gas up to 15% to 20% blend and then transport it. But then the issue is in terms of separating it depending on the need. So here again, large scale transport, you're predominantly looking at pipeline transport. Small scale transport, these trucks have lower capacity and these have much higher cost, but for shorter distances, this is currently being used. If you look at the integration opportunity in Alberta, a lot of focus has been from our side is in terms of looking at where are the opportunities, what are the demand sectors in Alberta where we could look at. This was looking at hydrogen production, but emission intensive sectors to the demand sector where GHG emission is much higher. There's low barrier to adoption, and looking at competition with other technologies to mitigate GHG. And then at the system-wide impact. So what is the overall cost of the system? And then the overall GHG impact rather than just the production. And this just talks about the whole energy system, much more detailed emphasis in terms of looking at the regions, looking at the resources available, the production. This is all based on how we have analyzed and modeled these scenarios and looking at demand sector and going down all the way to the devices and the users. One of the concepts that we have looked at is in terms of existing hydrogen SMR facilities in Alberta, adding CCS to it, producing blue hydrogen, captured carbon is transported to the storage site, and then you have this hydrogen that could be used in the demand sector. If we look at the whole chain where it could be integrated and the potential for this doing it in Alberta, you have production. This production is with any of these processes, our baseline looking at blue hydrogen with SMR, mature technology. And then you have all these carbon storage for the carbon captured. And then two scenarios we looked at: setting up the hydrogen plant in Fort Saskatchewan, transporting hydrogen to Edmonton or to Calgary. Probably you will build a plant near Calgary and then use this. This was the scenario if you have to transport it to the communities between Edmonton and Calgary. So you build a pipeline through that. And then this is going to the blending site of the city. From there, this is integrated into the different sector. We also looked at on-site hydrogen production. So the centralized blue hydrogen production, but down the road, when the technology improves and the cost goes down, could be potential of looking at a distributed hydrogen production for specifically use by the different industry. And so in this case, the key for us was first to look at oil sands upgrading. So where do we integrate hydrogen and produce blue hydrogen? Key is we already produce hydrogen, so adding CCS to it to produce blue hydrogen, that is an opportunity. If we look at that opportunity, we are looking at about 6 million tons per year of emissions by 2050, and through capturing CO2. And that could help in reducing the GHG emission. This is using SMR, it's 52% carbon capture. Then looking at the opportunity in residential and commercial sector. So residential and commercial sector, after it is produced from the low cost technology, is transported, blended, and then transported to this residential and commercial sector, mostly for heating purposes. So replacing natural gas, 15% blending in the existing infrastructure. And so you look at space heating, water heating, appliances for blending hydrogen. And then in commercial sector, similarly looking at space heating, water heating, and space cooling. But the total mitigation here is low. You could blend hydrogen, total mitigation of hydrogen is small. But again, you're talking about only 15%. And you see the amount of hydrogen demand. It's about 131,000 with 15% blending by 2030, and then goes up a little bit. But this is still half of the current average plant capacity of hydrogen that we have, 200,000 tons a year. We look at also in terms of if we do it across the board for heating purposes, so blending and producing high-octane into this, and also electrolysis. What we look at when we blend this hydrogen into the existing natural gas pipeline, the total reduction that you could get is about 4 million tons per year, majority coming out from and the potential in the industry side. And especially in the industry side, oil sands, where if we replace 15% of the natural gas, this is the kind of mitigation that we are looking at. Natural gas power generation, base power generation, the keys here is in terms of if we directly use natural gas to produce power and capture carbon, that is much more beneficial. And then in the transportation scenarios, where we look at a range of these different types of vehicles where hydrogen could be integrated, the key that we got out of this is in terms of there is a competing opportunity here with the electric vehicle only. And with the more renewables coming in, the challenge would be more to compete with that electric vehicle. So the penetration across 30 years and 50 years, there is more electric vehicle penetration compared to the fuel cell based vehicle. After putting all that together, so this is the result of the 300 different scenarios that you look at, what we are getting to is that these SMR, CCS options for mitigating GHG is much more beneficial. These are just showing where we have 50 megatons of mitigation. Others which are not here have lower mitigation, so you won't see this. But predominantly here is in terms of some of the combined high-cane scenario, and then the SMR CCS has a benefit. In terms of the hydrogen export, there is potential for us to export hydrogen with the different jurisdictions looking for hydrogen and making some announcement. We did a detailed analysis in terms of understanding where in US we can export, to Asia Pacific countries where we can export, and to European countries where we can export. And the key here is, again, producing these hydrogen, transporting the gaseous hydrogen to the port, liquefying it, and shipping it to the different jurisdictions from BC. The key is that this is more attractive to the Asia Pacific countries like Japan and Korea, where there is a lot of demand for, and then the projected demand for hydrogen, and the cost of delivering hydrogen and Alberta-based low-carbon hydrogen based on SMR plus CCS is attractive compared to the domestic potential for green hydrogen production. So that this is a potential for further looking into this. So the key opportunities that we look at for Alberta within next 5 years, you're looking at more into SMR plus CCS has a potential. ETR plus CCS is a newer technology coming in, more carbon capture, and the cost could go down in pretty short term. The other key thing is in terms of looking at more as the carbon prices increases, but more blue hydrogen production or low carbon hydrogen production. So integration of CCS into these facilities needs to be have decision on the optimal location of the facilities, where to have the hydrogen production, capturing carbon, transporting carbon, to sequestering it in the sink, and then the demand that where we need to transport it. Distribution of high-cane is initially it could create a demand, but looking at the GHG potential, this could be lower. But if there is an infrastructure just built for an investment there to transition to hydrogen economy, this GHG mitigation could go up. And then major transportation infrastructure is needed for any of these export opportunities and exploring the export opportunities. If we are looking at doing this with just the GHG mitigation potential, there are other options too. So other options need to be explored, which gives the best bang for the buck in terms of GHG mitigation. Opportunities for export to Japan and Korea, Asia Pacific countries where the delivered cost is much more attractive. For the transportation system, I'd say it's still the potential is there more on the heavy fuel truck side, and it's still the potential further to explore that option. And then as hydrogen becomes a trading commodity globally, there is a need for developing these standards, developing the carbon intensity characterization of these hydrogen. And so international partnership in this domain is needed. With that, I'd like to conclude my talk, and I would like to thank some of the sponsors for the work over the years, and then the contributions for this work. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Amit. Very informative, comprehensive presentation. Really appreciate. Niwei, do we have a question? Maybe
Yes, we got a great question here. A couple of questions here. I just pick one of them here. So Dr. Kumar, if you are right that blue H2 with CCS has a life cycle carbon intensity of 8 kilograms CO2 per kilogram H2, then that cannot be classified as low carbon hydrogen as defined by the EU as less than 5 kilograms CO2 per kilogram H2. That would not make our blue hydrogen attractive in the international market. What can be done to reduce life cycle CI further in Alberta?
I mean, the key to looking at the carbon intensity of hydrogen is the type of technology that you select. And then the carbon capture rate. If you look at some of these newer technology like ATR coming in, you can go all the way up to 95% carbon capture. That will help us in reducing the carbon intensity of this. Scaling it up, making larger scale plant will also help us in looking at some of these GHG intensity much lower. The production itself of natural gas all the way to the production plant for hydrogen, looking at the different unit operations in the front end itself, in terms of lowering down the fugitive emissions, those could also bring down the carbon intensity of the blue hydrogen.
Oh, okay. For the time reason, we'll keep the other question probably for the panel discussion session. Thank you again, Professor Kumar. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ken James, who is also a good friend of mine. Ken is a true petrochemical engineering expert as well as a business leader in the petrochemical industry. He is the CEO of West Coast Olefins Limited and the former CEO of Nautical Energy, a company developing methanol and fertilizer projects in Quebec and Alberta. And also the former president and CEO of Chemex Limited, an international oil and gas petrochemical consulting firm worked around the globe of many projects. Ken, I can say that knows the inside out of hydrogen production from hydrocarbons. And we could not have found a better person to speak on the subject of Alberta hydrogen for local and the global market, technical and the logistics challenges and the solutions. Ken, the screen is yours.
All right, I'll see. I can get my screen on and let me know if you have got it.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you for that very flattering. Hopefully I can live up to a little bit of the reputation you've created for me here, Max. And I really appreciate with CPEC inviting me to present at this conference. It's a topic that I have a lot of passion for, and I hope we can start working on real solutions. There's been a lot of talk for the last 30, 40 years. It's time we got on addressing these issues with climate change, et cetera. So hydrogen is going to be an important piece. With that, I will start. So we're going to do a few slides here on climate change and why it's important that we address these issues. I'm going to just looking at some of the focal areas for source the emissions and how we're going to address them. Talk about Alberta's potential role, the advantages in this province, the challenges we're going to have to overcome to get a hydrogen economy moving forward, and some solutions, at least the way I see them. So I think a lot of people will be familiar with a lot of this data. This is basically the big energy consumers, and if you want to make the correlation between energy consumers and who's emitting all the carbon, this is pretty clear. So Chinese economy is one of the biggest when you look at their population, and if you look at their fuel sources, you'll understand why. The US, not surprisingly, is second, and those two countries are by far the biggest emitters. In Canada, with its very small population, is 6th on that list. So it's not something we can ignore. We do need to address it. So to the two countries at the top, 42%, they represent to me the real opportunity to tackle the carbon problem. And I say it as an opportunity because I believe it is. And this is a couple of charts here on those two countries and the sources of their emissions. And it's important because they're quite different if you look at them. So not surprisingly, China is largely driven by coal. They're making progress on reducing their coal. But if we have got to find ways to make alternate energy resources available to them, and I think Canada has an opportunity to be one of those alternatives. So without that, I mean, they're going to use the fuel they have. The US has gone a long ways. As you can see, they're largely, they're down to 8.5% coal now, so that's not the big issue. It's interesting that both the US and China are using about more or less the same amount of oil, liquid hydrocarbon fuels, and that's mostly doing for vehicle transport. So those are largely unchanged. So we hear a lot of talk about electric cars, but we're not making a very big dent. But I believe as we tackle the heavier hydrocarbons like coal first, we will look at oil, and that will be largely driven by electric cars. Then we got to figure out how we're going to get the electricity to drive that whole economy. Natural gas is a big opportunity in China, I believe, but we've got to find a way to economically get LNG to China and India, all of Asia. And China's one of the leaders in renewables. And so is but there are limits. You're just not going to replace all of that bottom part of that bar with those. So the focal areas that I've seen as people are looking to reduce carbon emissions, and this is really focal area from the sources point of view, is one is to look at less carbon intensive fuels. So coal is phase out is well advanced, especially in Europe and North America. Similar phase out I expect will happen with the liquid fossil fuels. And I think people are slowly accepting that natural gas has a huge role as a transition fuel as we move to other alternatives, whether it's blue hydrogen, whether it's nuclear. And I think we can tweak wind and solar, but again, those have limits on the capacity, and the wind and the sun don't always shine when we need the energy. And then non-carbon fuels are getting a lot of attention. And to me, you really have to look at hydrogen and ammonia, and carbon capture is essential to all of that. I just don't see it happening on any scale without basically being sourced from methane, hydrolysis of water using green energy to make hydrogen, and then turn it into some other form of green energy. Thermodynamic processes are not 100% efficient. That just seems to be value loss. So, but the focus I'm going to be focusing in my presentation will be on the hydrogen and ammonia options as potential fuels. And then the real question is, why Alberta? What is unique about Alberta, and why are they well positioned to build a world scale? And I agree with Dr. Kumar. We have the huge opportunity to build a major hydrogen-based economy, and not just address Canada's emissions, but look at how we can impact the global emissions in other countries. So we've got abundant and low-cost natural gas with an extensive network. Big part of our gas is now stranded because the US is now a net exporter of gas, so they no longer import ours. We've struggled to get pipelines to get LNG off the West Coast, but if we ever do, it is clearly going to be far more efficient to come off of Prince Rupert and get to Asia than going the US Gulf Coast through the Panama Canal and across. So there's a big opportunity with the amount of gas that we've got, and it's going to be low cost, relatively speaking. Carbon sequestration is a major advantage for Alberta. Not only do we have the reservoirs, we've got a lot of geological data on those reservoirs, on their capacity, where they are, what kind of containment we have. Essential to achieve climate change targets, and I believe for this province to exploit its resources, we are going to have to address this. So this having an essential need is very critical motivator for Alberta, and as most people know, necessity is the mother of invention. Access to US and Asian markets. I think we can create those opportunities to get to those markets. It really is a matter of getting off the west coast of Canada. And there is a huge underutilized network of pipes where we used to export natural gas to the US that we should look at leveraging in a different service in the future. The province has also got a large underutilized pipeline networks all across the province, and a regulatory process that is supportive of development. And I can tell you, I've had a lot of experience in British Columbia in the last 3 years, and there is a big advantage in having that supportive government and regulatory process. So there are some major advantages. I think that we need to jump on this and not take our time and study it. I think we need to do it quickly. Behind all of this, as I've said, carbon capture is absolutely essential. It is our advantage. So we've got the reservoirs for the long-term sequestration. We've got existing underutilized pipeline networks. I think you saw that TransCanada and Pembina announced their effort to build a 20 million ton carbon sequestration network, which is massive. And there are a lot of projects already underway. So Quest is now operating, doing 1.2 million tons per year. The carbon trunk line is now running at 1.6, and it's expandable out to, I can't remember what it was. It's a big number, 14.6, I think. Pathways announced the 8.5. We're in multiple phases, from phase 1 being 8.5 million tons a year and expanding that to 40. The Alberta Carbon Grid, which is the Pembina TransCanada, or TC Energy, I guess. There's to build a 20 million ton per year and a number of other projects. So there is an opportunity for sitting in this province to capture tens, if not hundreds of millions of tons of carbon, which is a big advantage. That's a lot of natural gas being processed and carbon captured. Some of the major challenges we're going to have, and I think Dr. Kumar referred to this, is hydrogen storage and distribution is difficult. It's a very low molecular weight molecule, and very, very low boiling point. It doesn't boil at minus 253 degrees C. So it is very difficult to get any density. It's very difficult to compress and transport. Pipeline connections to large consumer markets will be important. I don't know any other way that you're going to do in any volume other than pipelines. Ammonia is a very interesting option, is that it can be liquefied at relatively low pressure and offers an alternative way to transport to distant markets. So at less pressure than you have in your propane barbecue, you can transport ammonia as liquid, and it's got a high hydrogen content. And of course, when you use ammonia, it emits nitrogen, which is 79% of air anyways, and water. And carbon capture, I think I've talked about this a lot. It's absolutely essential. Blue hydrogen requires large-scale carbon gathering, sequestration. Identifying the underground storage options and capacity will be critical. Nobody's going to build the facilities for those blue facilities unless they know exactly where that carbon's going. Capital and operating costs can be prohibitive, especially the compression costs. So capturing CO2 from flue gas, most of the cost is actually compression. And then the low concentration ends up a large volumes. The contactors end up being huge in the aiming system. So very, very high cost impact. And I'll get into that. So the technologies that are addressing that. Economics, carbon taxes can be major economic barriers unless those funds can be funneled back. Either A is make sure that they're uniformly applied across the globe, because you're just disadvantaging your own economy if the other countries don't follow. And it's very critical that the carbon credits that go back that should get funded out of that carbon tax should be used to promote things like blue hydrogen. Technical, the last 30 years, we've seen a significant change in plant designs, but most of that was driven by energy efficiency. For the early part of my career, we only talked about peak oil, and I remember at the turn of the millennium, we were talking about prices of oil going $100, $200 a barrel. And so companies got very focused on the amount of energy. Of course, then the shale gas and shale oil industries developed, and suddenly we had large amounts of gas and large amounts of oil, and none of that came true. Climate change is going to change the focus again, I believe. In the last decade, we've seen a lot of change in focus, but I haven't seen a lot of rubber hitting the road yet, but I think that's about to start. And when we start thinking about these targets for 2030 and the targets for net zero of 2050, we are going to have to make some big swings very quickly. And so we need to go back and look at the design of all of those energy systems, not just from an efficiency point of view. I think we're going to have to revisit the technologies we're using, and we're really going to look at how we're going to design those facilities to reduce the cost of carbon capture and sequestration. This, to put it in perspective, when you start talking about carbon taxes, what kind of impact it has. And this is what it costs. So for every $50 of carbon tax, think about that as adding $2.44 to the price of natural gas, because that's how much CO2 you're going to emit. So when we talk about $170 a ton, that is a major impact on Canadian gas price, because you still need to have some, can't all just be tax. So it's important that those funds get credited back into creating a carbon-free economy. So I'm going to get a little bit now into the production of hydrogen. So the proven hydrogen technology is steam methane reforming. So this is a picture of a typical steam methane reformer in hydrogen service. You basically have these two chambers here, which are vertical tubes filled with catalyst, reforming catalyst. And the gas gets distributed and then gathered on the bottom and out. And you're basically feeding methane, water, and converting the that into what they call synthesis gas, syngas, which is a mixture of CO, CO2, hydrogen, and water. The primary sources of emissions on those are the stack back here, and of course, all of the CO2 that was in the carbon molecules that is in the methane that is reformed to make the hydrogen. So that's a typical reformer, and that is the way hydrogen's been made up until now. I think Dr. Kumar spoke about what they're now making moves into autothermal reforming. So this is the chemistry. I'm not going to bore everybody with too much chemistry, but the simple reforming reaction is basically taking methane, it reacts with hydrogen, it's an equilibrium reaction. It creates CO, carbon monoxide, and 3 hydrogens. Then that carbon monoxide can also undergo what they call a water gas shift reaction, which will react again with water and make CO2 plus hydrogen. So the net reaction here is basically methane, 2 hydrogens, makes CO2 and 4 hydrogens. And it's interesting to note that only 2 of the molecules of hydrogen came from the methane, 2 of them came from water. So similar to what you would do with hydrolysis, but you're not using all that electricity. So it's important to get some of that water, hydrogen sourced out of water. Partial oxidation. So this is really where I think the changes in the industry in the design of a hydrogen plant to facilitate carbon capture. And partial oxidation is essentially, it's just injecting oxygen in substoichiometric volumes to not facilitate complete combustion, but partial combustion. And what you want to do is manage the amount of oxygen basically to control this first partial oxidation reaction, which is taking methane, oxygen, turning it to CO and water. You don't want to keep going until it's complete combustion and turn it all into CO2, because there's an opportunity to react that CO with the water gas shift reaction here to make even more hydrogen, which is the objective of the hydrogen plant. So, and that is the technology essentially that leads to an autothermal reformer. So this is an autothermal reformer, a schematic. There are many, and I've worked with many of them in the world. Basically, you add natural gas and steam, comes into the top of the reformer, and you add oxygen mixed with more steam. And that basically is internal direct contact burning, partial burning. And so that's that partial oxidation that happens. That heats the whole gas mixture up to the reforming temperature. Then the gas flows down through. This is a bed of catalyst, the same catalyst that was in the SMR tubes that I showed earlier, and basically comes out of there. So basically, with direct contact heating, obviously it's a lot more, virtually 100% thermodynamically efficient in transferring that heat to the gas. So that's a much better way to do it. So the more efficient you are in getting your thing, the less gas you need to burn and less carbon emissions. The other one is that the CO2 here is at full pressure. And I think if you recall, one of the biggest costs in carbon capture is compression. If you can do this at full pressure, then carbon capture becomes very routine. So hydrogen as a potential non-carbon fuel. Advantages that I see are it can be produced in large volumes in this province. We've got lots of gas, and we are looking for new markets. We can locate it adjacent to underground formations suitable for carbon sequestration, making the cost of transport, reducing that quite a bit. Existing pipelines, networks that can be used for distribution. That's important, again, reducing the cost of this full carbon gathering sequestration system, and can be used as a carbon-free fuel in a number of applications, whether it's combustion in fired heaters, used in fuel cells, or gas turbines. The big disadvantage there, I think I mentioned, was the storage, a major concern. And there's no existing market. So we're going to have to count that if you build these plants, that the markets are going to develop, and the incentives provided by the government will be sustained to make the economics work. Ammonia is the other alternative fuel. So to me, that has some big advantages, that it can be produced in large volumes. Its energy density is much higher. Again, it should be liquefied at moderate pressure, easy to then ship across oceans, which is not practical for hydrogen in my mind, not in any volumes. Markets and infrastructure already exist for ammonia. There's $110+ million ton per annum market for ammonia. Most of it goes to fertilizers. And the fertilizer market also offers an interesting carbon utilization. So, if you were producing ammonia for fuel for much of the year, the fertilizer industry tends to sell all their product in 2 points in the year, in the spring and the fall. In those times, you could react ammonia to produce with CO2 to produce urea, which is the most common form of fertilizer used. And so it does create a utilization opportunity for CO2 as well. And I believe it's an excellent alternative for LNG to address carbon emissions in Asia and take advantage of the carbon sequestration capacity in the province. Some of the disadvantages: toxicity. Ammonia gas is very, very toxic. And then there's a lot of work going on right now on using ammonia directly as a carbon-free fuel. So there's a lot of work going on directly firing heaters with ammonia. There's a couple of initiatives underway right now, and it looks very promising for direct ammonia-fired fuel cells, ammonia-fired gas turbines. MHI is doing a commercial test right now. And then there's looking at ammonia just being a way to transport it and then converting it back to hydrogen and nitrogen when you need to use it. So in my concluding remarks, I'd say the government policy on carbon credits needs to be clear for the long term to support project development. It's a critical role for the government to play to provide that stability to make these large investments. Carbon capture infrastructure needs to develop immediately. Alberta does have a good head start, and there seems to be a lot of interest. So I'm very encouraged with that. I hope it does unfold to the scale that people are talking. If we have, if companies are talking of having 50 to 100 million tons of carbon storage by 2030, that would be a great opportunity for the province. Hydrogen markets, I believe, are going to need to be accessible by pipelines. So they're going to be we've got a massive amounts of hydrogen or natural gas distribution. So we'll probably do the conversions where they're used relatively close to where the users are. And if we can convert some of the large pipelines that used to export gas to the US, maybe an opportunity for the US. Ammonia, I believe, was the most viable option for providing an alternative for Asian markets. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to go into plant designs for hydrogen and ammonia to basically focus on efficiency and better facilitate carbon capture. And that's my presentation. So if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Ken. A great kind of a description of the overall industry landscape and the technical background. I do see a couple of questions, but I think they are more suited for the panel discussion. Maybe we'll park it for now and move on to next speaker. Is that okay? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Our next speaker is Mr. ZhiMing Mao, who is a graduate from the very top technical university of China, that's the Tsinghua University. And I'm jealous. ZhiMing, or Zen, has long been engaged in the development and implementation of hydrogen energy and fuel cell related projects, as well as other clean energy projects in China. In his decorated career, he has also participated in the development of 2 China national standards, quality of hydrogen and the natural gas mix for vehicle use. We saw the presentation from previous 2 talking about it. And hydrogen fuel cell power supply systems for telecommunications. ZhiMing's presentation is on hydrogen production and application in China. I suppose many of us will be really interested because what China does in the energy business is a concern or interest to the rest of the world. Please, ZhiMing.
Thank you. May I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Max. Thank you, President, volunteers, experts, and everyone. I'm very glad I have the opportunity to share my information on hydrogen production and applications in China. I am a hydrogen engineer working for Hydrogen Association for China Association for Hydrogen Energy since 2006. And later Beijing Huaqing Technology Company. I attended some hydrogen and fuel cell projects, both for vehicle and stationary use. Attended some HCNG or Huaqing and P2G program, as well as related standard. And I'd like to share some basic information of China hydrogen industry, HCNG, P2G, and the fuel cell applications. for your reference. This is United Nations net zero carbon neutral commitments by countries. China and some developing countries will meet the standard by 2060. And China's carbon peak will be in 2030. Canada and most developed country is by 2050. I think it's a huge challenge for our country because the goal to limit the long-term increase of average global temperature to 1.5 degrees is a very huge challenge. And our energy sector and even the whole society will change dramatically in the next decades. An Institute of Tsinghua University predict a scenario of China's electricity structure in 2060. We can see gold will drop dramatically. Wind power and solar PV will expand dramatically, as well as other available technologies, especially CCS or CCUS in natural gas and new bioenergy. Hydrogen, I think, will play an important role, both in renewable or fossil fuel ways, because dropping in coal or other traditional fossil fuel will increase the risk of electricity supply and stability. From recent events, we can see China, US, or other countries are not ready for the transition. Hydrogen is not an original fuel on Earth. It's a zero carbon or low carbon fuel carrier of fuel form, just similar like electricity. So there are different hydrogen sources, basically represented by three colors, gray, blue, and green. Gray hydrogen produced by natural gas or coal. The latter is sometimes called black hydrogen. They are relatively inexpensive, but has a very large carbon footprint by emitting CO2. The good news is gray hydrogen can be turned blue using CCS technology. For example, sequestered underground. And green hydrogen can be manufactured with zero emission using renewable electricity, but usually more expensive than gray or blue hydrogen. And we are interested in both ways to generate clean hydrogen, either blue or green. Of course, there are some other colors hydrogen. For example, turquoise hydrogen, pyrolysis method at high temperature to form hydrogen and solid carbon black. Another source is red hydrogen from nuclear hydrogen production. In general way, they could be attributed to green hydrogen because the low carbon intensity of production processing. As reported, hydrogen production in China is about 21 million tons in 2016, 30 of the global production. Next is US, approximately 10 million tons each year, according to DOE. And Canada ranked in the top 10 for some 3 million tons annually for industry use, and approximately 4% of global total. And around 96% of the global hydrogen production is generated from fossil fuels, including 48% from natural gas. Most of them are natural gas reforming using steam, and 30% from hydrocarbons and alcohols, and 18% from coal. And the hydrogen production from water electricity only count about 2 to 4%. In China, about 62% of hydrogen is generated from coal right now. And about 19% from natural gas, because China has a lack of natural gas. And hydrogen by water electrolysis only account for about 1%. For a long time, hydrogen has been used in agriculture, chemical, metallurgical, and many other industries.
ZhiMing, you might have to skip some slides because we might be running out of time if you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And in 2021, more than 1/3 of the big enterprises has made the hydrogen layout in the entire industry chain, including hydrogen production, storage, refueling, and use. This group includes Sinopec, PetroChina, National Energy, Huaqing, State Power Investment, Three Gorges, National Nuclear, and many other big groups. And Sinopec is the biggest one, which is world's largest petroleum energy consumptions, and it produced 3.5 million tons hydrogen per year, accounting for about 14% of China. So in the next 5 years, they plan to build 1,000 hydrogen infrastructures, hydrogen filling stations, or hydrogen and gasoline combined filling stations. And its goal is to become Chinese biggest hydrogen energy provider. And according to the Hydrogen Energy News from January to October 2020, the domestic hydrogen industrial investment is reached to 140 billion yuan. And in the first half year of 2021, the total investment of hydrogen fuel cell projects in China exceeded 170 billion yuan, around 30 billion Canadian dollars. And right now there are about 30 CCS projects put into operation or under construction in China, with a capture capacity with 3 million tons per year. And Sinopec initiates China's first mega CCS project in Shandong province, and can reduce carbon emissions by 1 million tons per year, the equivalence of planting nearly 9 million trees or shutting down 300,000 small cars. And the existing CCS project in China mainly focused on small-scale COR demonstration in petroleum, coal chemistry, and electricity industry. And okay, and on July 2021, China released China CCUS pathway study by the Ministry of Economy and Environment. In corresponding with the technology development forecast, now 2050 and 2060 need relatively by CCS technology up to 1.4 billion tons to 1.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide. Among them, bioenergy CCS and direct air CCS need to achieve emission reduction respectively 600 million tons and 300 million tons of carbon dioxide. And the cost of CCUS by 2030 is 310 to 770 yuan per ton. By 2060, the cost will drop to 140 to 410 yuan per ton, around 20 to 60 US dollars of carbon dioxide. And this is one of our project of HCNG, hydrogen mixed compressed natural gas from 2010, or Huaqing. And we cooperate with Shanxi Natural Gas Corporation to establish China's first HCNG station, this one. And to generate daily 200,000 cubic meters for industrial and heavy truck use. Before that, we have developed some technology for HCNG internal combustion engine, pressure vessels, mixing skid, and mirroring devices. And the project investment is around 15 million Canadian dollars for the station, and covering the area of 7,000 square meters at the south of Shanxi province near Yellow River. And it accomplished to mixing hydrogen from COG, coking oven gas, and natural gas to fuel aluminum plants and heavy-duty trucks with CNG and HNG and HCNG fuel. The project won Rudolf Aaron Award in 2014, and still one of the world's largest HCNG filling station right now. And by combining natural gas and byproduct hydrogen from coal gas in coking enterprises, the alternative fuel is produced for energy saving and more environmental friendly, and has a good power and emission performance of internal combustion engines. So it's Shanxi Natural Gas Corporation's 4 gas-in-1 strategy of natural gas, coal-bedded methane, coal carbon gas, and hydrogen. Because this group controlled 80% pipeline of a natural gas pipeline of Shanxi province. And the station provided HNG to industrial customers and HCNG to truck fleets, and 3/4 for industrial use with low pressure around up to 6 megapascal, and others with compressed to 22 megapascal for heavy truck fuels. And the mixer, we use the static mixer, pneumatic fume cut valves to check the flow, pressure, temperature, warp index for the proper position and responsible sensitive. And the control system has a self-locking function to prevent arbitrary operation. And the mixture rate is different. For the industrial users, we choose 1:9 ratio. And for the truck users, we choose 2:8. And we use 3 steel wood high pressure gas storage tank for because it's small area and low construction difficulty. And the tank made by 80mm strip steel and with a thick widening belt layer outside the inner layer of the tank to achieve the purpose of high pressure resistance for its safe, reliable, and stable operation. And the working pressure of the tanks is 25 megapascal, around 3,600 PSI. And the water volume is 15 cubic meters, and 2 is 10 cubic meters. And we use diaphragm compressors as compression devices for mixed gas. Because it's oil lubricated positive displaced compressor. And we change it for the HCNG fuel. And the HCNG fueling reduce the emission of pollutions, mainly carbon dioxide and NOx from the automobile exhaust. Compared to the pure CNG fuel, it can reduce the emission to more than 4,000 tons of CO2 and 40 tons of NOx, and which is lower than Euro 4 standard. And we also push forward for the HCNG fuel station in China. which use some important data from our project and the standard published in 2017. And for green hydrogen, China has strong solar PV and wind power capacity. Is the basis of the production of affordable green hydrogen. Because the cost problem, so every green hydrogen project need to consider how to get profit from it. In 2019, China's new added PV power capacity is 30 gigawatt. The cumulative installed capacity reached 2,204 gigawatt, which generated 224 terawatt hour, means billion kilowatt hour, accounting for about 3% of the country's total power generation in that year. And in 2020, the cumulative installed capacity of wind power in China was 281 gigawatt, including 271 gigawatt of onshore and 9 gigawatt of offshore, and generated 466 terawatt hour, about 6% of the national total power generation and 21% of the total renewable energy power generation. By 2030 and 2050, China installed wind power capacity will reach 400 gigawatt and 1,000 gigawatt respectively. And the wind power will meet 17% of the domestic power demands by 2050. The next case is another project in Jilin province, north of China, 200 megawatt wind power to hydrogen production. This project designed in 2015, not only for the science research, but also we consider the economy evaluation and the location and the local regulations around it, and approved by the National Energy Administration. The main issue we want to solve is due to the determinant, the unstable characteristic of wind power, using hydrogen production through electricity and proper operating mode to adapt to this situation in energy conservation process. The second one is at that time the most form of energy storage is very limited in scale, time, and space. It's hard to match the magnitude for the wind curtailment and power rationing. That is not very enough. That's only achieve very short period energy conservation and storage. So we wish hydrogen as a form of long-term and large-scale storage and transportation provide the possibility to for the new business model in this project. The third one is the electricity power industry is currently gradually increasing in proportion and the penetration rate of new energy in the traditional energy structure. So we wish hydrogen will play an important role to stabilize the grid in the future. And our system has
Jimmy, can I suggest that you just go over the next couple of slides quickly, then go to the we just put that. Just flip through it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's China's fuel cell policy and the national demonstrations right now. So far, China hasn't issued a national hydrogen plan or roadmap, but 30 local governments have issued their own hydrogen energy plans with varying timelines. Recently, the central government announced two national-wide demonstration projects. One is Hydrogen Fuel Cell City, There are 3 city groups running fuel cell vehicles. Beijing city group, including 12 cities, plan to 74 hydrogen stations, and Shanghai, including 6 cities, 105 stations. Guangdong, including 12 cities, plan to build 200 stations. Each of them will run 10,000 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And the requirement of the vehicle fuel cell power is 7 watt per kilogram in Beijing group. And another project is hydrogen into 10,000 families, which is joint created by the Ministry of Science and Technology and Shandong province. That means 1 hydrogen highway, 2 hydrogen ports, 3 population science spaces, 4 hydrogen parks, and 5 hydrogen communities. The general requirement of this project are operating of 3,000 or more fuel cell vehicles, 15 or more hydrogen fueling stations, cumulative mileage not less than 100 million kilometers, hydrogen consumption no less than 10,000 tons. And the project will start from this year and in the next 4 years. In 2020, China has built a total 118 hydrogen fueling stations. Another 167 under construction or planning. Among them, 101 completed hydrogen fueling station has put into operation, and 17 are to be operated. The third one in the world. In 2020, in the world, there are 553 hydrogen fueling stations, 200 in Europe and 142 in Japan. In 2019, more than 3,000 fuel cell commercial vehicles were produced in China, ranking first in the world. And in 2020, the production and sales of fuel cell vehicles were 1,199 and 1,177 respectively. This is some fuel cell suppliers in China, Canada, and the world. And the left picture show the fuel cell vehicles, buses, trucks approved by the Ministry of Industry and Information. And the right one shows 60 kilowatt metal plate water cooling pan stack made by one of our business partners. In China, a famous Chinese geographer, Huaqing, created an imaging line in 1935 from Heihe northeast to Tengchong southwest of China. Although solar or wind resources can be used throughout the country, but certain regions can offer more favorable conditions, especially on the west of this line. There are about 2.6 million square meters of desert and gobi land, mainly in the northwest. This area are the basis for the future development for renewable energy. And for following the current technology, we can build 128 billion kilowatt of solar PV and little less wind power in this area. And part of them could be used to produce clean hydrogen, gradually turning deserts green. In the east, most composed of plain and big cities and industries is energy consumption area with the population more than 94% of China. And hydrogen strategy, such as natural gas, CCS, green hydrogen, vehicle use, and hydrogen export is familiar between Canada and China. And in real project, the goal and condition is very different. we really need to business model case by case for every concrete project to make it more sense and success. From HCNG, P2G, CCS, microgrid, energy storage, even desalination and many other projects. And I wish more and more people can work together to produce more and more clean hydrogen to make the world better. That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, ZhiMing, very much. Sorry for the time constraint. I know we have a lot of information to share. You provide such a great landscape and the details of the China situation. For the time constraint, can I ask you and all the other speakers, please go to the Q&A boxes, see what questions are directed to you. You can type, if you can type in the answers, and it will save us a lot of time. Also, give more opportunities to answer all the questions. Please try to do so. Our next speaker is Chris Norris from Siemens. Chris is the Director of Business Development for the New Energy Business Unit of Siemens Energy Canada, with a focus on growing the green hydrogen economy in Canada. In a career spanning 25 years, Chris has been in various technical management and advisory roles, from engineering of aircraft engines to operation strategy and advisory in energy transition from government for government and large businesses. Chris is a very special kind of professional engineer with a master's degree in engineering, an MBA, and a law degree in engineering infrastructure. I suppose many of us know the technical dominance of Siemens in the energy industry. With Chris's role and his unique background and Siemens' strategy, Chris would be a perfect speaker to talk about ready infrastructure for hydrogen economy. Chris, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak at this conference, and thanks very much to the other panelists for the insightful presentations and commentary so far. I know I'm taking away, I think, more than I'm bringing to this table, and happy to be part of this discussion. So let me just share my screen and we'll go from here. Please let me know when you see it in presentation mode. Okay. Well, stop me if you can't see it, but I'll just proceed here. I think, as with any of these conversations, I'm probably going to rehash some of the points that have been made, especially in the early part of my presentation, so I'll go fairly quickly. The first is we start with why. What is it that is driving this energy transition? We see global CO2 emissions going up, and we see how they are split out. We see that industry, transport, and buildings make up a significant proportion of CO2 emissions, where their share of renewables and low carbon power sources is low. And then we see that the power sector does have a significant contribution to GHG emissions, but what we're seeing to everybody's optimism and excitement is that a significant proportion of renewables is penetrating into the power sector. Now, the question is, how do we decarbonize those difficult to abate sectors with the renewable energy that's coming online? We certainly will need a significant amount of new renewable energy in order to do it, but we'll also need the intermediate technologies to get the renewable energies into those areas of the economy that need to be decarbonized. And we use the term sector coupling to talk about how we're going to pull transport, buildings, and industry together with renewable power. There are obviously several pathways to a sustainable future. The first one being, as I mentioned, alternative power generation. We're seeing aggressive renewable growth. We're seeing a transition away from coal towards natural gas, and natural gas towards sustainable hydrogen. Siemens Energy obviously has a large role to play with our ownership, majority ownership of Siemens Gamesa renewable energy. We also see efficient energy management, smart grid technology, and basically how do we maximize the usage of the assets that are already in place. We need improved energy efficiency in terms of process automation. How do we waste less and do more? And of course, there are process solutions. A lot of what we discussed so far today is about carbon capture from existing technology processes. And then, last but not least, we have one of the pathways to a sustainable future, which is hydrogen utilization. Certainly, we've seen hydrogen emerge as a promising technology in the past. We're seeing a resurgence now, but I echo the comments of the previous commentators when I say that we need to make sure that we sort of carry this momentum forward into actualizing what we're hoping for. So in terms of demand, I don't think I'm telling anybody anything new here in terms of the rate of growth of hydrogen demand. It's anybody's guess as to what it's going to be in 2050, but the projections are that it's going to grow at quite a significant compound annual growth rate. If present predictions are any indication. And then where does it all fit in? So on the right, we see what Siemens Energy sees as essentially our field of action. Starting on the left, hydropower, wind power, renewable power production, into the grid, solar power production, transmission. And then in blue here, we see our electrolyzer, we have compression, transportation of the molecule through the pipeline back to potentially a gas turbine where the sort of re-electrification pathway takes place. E-ammonia, I'm not telling anybody anything new here in terms of the amount of promise there is for the use of hydrogen as a coupling mechanism between sectors. We know that there are trillions of dollars in assets worldwide right now that run on liquid hydrocarbons. Those are, without stranding those, they're going to be operating for a significant period of time into the future. We need to do an infrastructure transition to operate on lower carbon intensity energy sources, battery-powered cars and trucks, as well as the multiple other uses that we see of electricity used directly. But in the intermediate time frame, we need to make sure that we can make use of existing assets to keep the cost of the transition within a manageable level. A carbon-free hydrogen economy will support CO2 reduction. The question is, how do we make the hydrogen carbon-free? I think a lot of this has already been said by the previous speakers. I won't talk at all about any of the production of hydrogen because that's been clearly covered. But the title of my talk today is about readying the infrastructure for hydrogen, for the energy transition and the hydrogen portion of that. So we see blending of hydrogen and transportation of hydrogen in physical form. As was just explained by the previous speaker, significant pathways exist and are being actualized in China as well as in North America and Europe. We see synfuel and chemical production in terms of methanol and ammonia, which are clearly two of the most promising pathways for managing this difficult to manage substance, hydrogen. Electricity, of course, in terms of storage, and then hydrogen storage for long-term energy storage use. On the right, we see where are we consuming this thing. Of course, we've seen that refineries consume the lion's share of hydrogen right now. And at the bottom, we see for future re-electrification, an area that we do see promise in, and certainly we want to see promise in from a Siemens Energy point of view. If we look at our deployed fleet of gas turbines, our customers are looking at ways to decarbonize their assets. So how can Siemens Energy produce a fuel that will help our customers meet their carbon reduction targets? Well, I'd like to jump right now into some examples. What are we doing here in Siemens Energy to actualize this promise? We have a project in southern Chile, the Huaqing project, the world's first integrated plant for the production of climate-neutral e-fuels from wind and water. So we are using carbon dioxide captured directly from the atmosphere, direct air capture carbon dioxide, combined with hydrogen from a Siemens electrolyzer, powered by renewable energy in the form of wind in a geographical area that has high wind potential, synthesizing methanol from these ingredients and then converting the e-methanol into e-gasoline for transportation back to Europe. I think this is, it makes an important couple of points about the way Siemens Energy, a German company, sees the future of the energy sector. One is Germany is going to rely on imports of power for a long time to come, imports of energy. So why not be a producer of its own energy elsewhere in the world, especially where renewable energies are very promising? And this explains the deployment of this project in southern Chile, in the Patagonia region, where the wind potential is very high. Bottle up that renewable energy in a usable form and transport it back to Germany. I think the other important point that it makes is it's important to note that one of the key partners in this project is the car company Porsche. Porsche, of course, makes luxury race cars, fast automobiles, and a significant majority of the cars that Porsche has produced over the years are still on the road. And Porsche wants to keep it that way. They want to keep their owners happy, and they want to keep, essentially, to put it in the commercial terms, those assets from being stranded. And so, of course, you can't replace an existing, say, 1972 Porsche with a new battery-powered Porsche and achieve the same effect. But what you can do is replace the fuel with a net carbon neutral fuel. And in that case, we're doing, as I mentioned earlier, extending the longevity of assets that are already deployed. And in this case, the strategy is to work with a consumer sector, a customer segment that is less sensitive to prices. But of course, we see that energy is a commodity, and so we're using this as a spearhead to bring down the cost of the deployment of this type of synthetic fuel project. We talked earlier about transportation of this hydrogen from place to place. Pipeline infrastructure conversion to hydrogen shows little impact on pipeline capacity to transport energy. So this is an excellent example of the type of repurposing and reuse of existing infrastructure that can aid in the transition, because building out new infrastructure is certainly expensive. I think one of the most significant aspects of the growth of the hydrogen economy is that we often talk about it in terms of the supply side and the demand side, right? We're hearing a lot about SMR and blue hydrogen and carbon capture and electrolysis, and we're hearing about the supply side. And then we're hearing about the demand side. Who's using this stuff? How can we use it for mobility? How can we use it to decarbonize sectors? There really is a third aspect, just as important as those two ends of the value chain, and that is the infrastructure. The infrastructure to compress, convert, transport, and store the hydrogen. And so if we look at the bottom, changing a pipeline to accommodate small amounts of hydrogen, less than 10%, no major changes essentially are required. The existing compression system can be used, the existing pipeline system can be used. And considering the amount of natural gas that's consumed today, 10% of that large amount gives us ample opportunity to use existing infrastructure as we are ramping up the deployment of green hydrogen production, especially in this country, but everywhere. Of course, as you increase the amount of hydrogen, and I think as we heard from our previous speaker, we wind up, having to face more technical challenges. And I think this audience probably knows a lot about more more about those technical challenges than I do in terms of the increased requirements for compression, the embrittlement of steel under the influence of hydrogen. But importantly, it's important to recall that retrofitting existing infrastructure is oftentimes much more cost effective than creating new infrastructure. As an example, Europe plans to create an extensive hydrogen pipeline and storage infrastructure, what they call the H2 backbone, connecting large industrial centers. We're looking at long pipelines, and an important aspect to recall is that moving these molecules, despite the fact that you're moving a lot of mass from place to place, of course, in a linear infrastructure pipeline arrangement, you're able to move a tremendous amount of energy that's held up in those molecules, be they hydrogen, methane, synthetic methane, or any derivative. A long distance pipeline can have 10 times the energy carrying capacity as a high voltage overhead line, something even those of us who are advocates of green hydrogen need to keep in mind. Converting those electrons into molecules and moving the molecules around is essentially very cost effective, rather than trying to build out transmission to do deployment of green hydrogen at a micro scale. Hydrogen transportation capacity by pipeline, it's despite the density difference and the energy difference that compensates, essentially you can have a net equal amount of hydrogen being transmitted from place to place through pipelines. Of course, there are, in the third bullet here, other technical aspects that must be considered, like the amount of power required to do the compression on hydrogen. But essentially, it doesn't take away from the promise of this substance as a decarbonization pathway. So where does Siemens Energy capabilities fit into all this? Here we see essentially the value chain of green energy, of green hydrogen. From the left-hand side, planning and consulting, Siemens can do essentially everything, including balance of plant. I start here in the middle when I look at this figure and say that we're producing the electrolyzer to convert electricity into a gas, and essentially that's what an electrolyzer is. We conventionally think of it as a device that converts water into hydrogen, but really it's a device that converts electricity into hydrogen and uses water as a proton source. It's an electricity gasifier. And from the downstream point of view, all the aspects that you are well familiar with Siemens Energy for, and Siemens previously, compressors, storage systems, water treatment, etc., all the handling of the gases can be done. And then further downstream in the value chain, that's where we get into partnerships, whether it's carbon capture for synthesizing follow-on molecules, or the synthesis of molecules themselves. Our extensive abilities and partnerships in the industry facilitate that. And then looking left upstream, from an electrical point of view, you're all familiar with Siemens' capabilities around transmission, distribution, substations, transformers, all the things that make the grid and the electric system work. So how do we scale this up? Well, our approach is the latest model of our PEM electrolyzer. We call it Silyzer 300 implying it's the third generation. Siemens has been in the hydrogen business for quite some time, whether it's fuel cells for military use, which we've done for decades, or the PEM electrolysis approach that we've been working on for at least 10 years and commercialized a couple of generations of it so far. So here we have the Silyzer 300, 17.5 megawatt base system that you see here. Each of these modules is about the size of a residential fridge, just under a megawatt each, comprised of 50 proton exchange membrane module assemblies. The device operates at atmospheric pressure It's a very passive and robust device. All the fluid motion is driven by natural buoyancy. And so you see a two-phase, or at least a gas-liquid mixture coming out of the modules and being separated in these separation tanks overhead. And then the downstream balance of plant does things like deoxygenation, drying, and compression for the downstream processes. So a high-efficiency system designed for more than 75% conversion efficiency, highly modular. We can be essentially extended limitlessly with this 17.5 megawatt unit. It's not unheard of to have requests for feasibility studies in the multi-hundred megawatt to gigawatt range. And it's this type of device that these operators are looking for. High availability due to the robust design I mentioned. Flexible operation, as is the nature of PEM electrolyzers, and essentially maintenance free. An 80,000 hour operating lifetime for each of these modules, easy exchange of the modules at the end of life, no cleaning effort, service coverage around the world. Really a strong workhorse for the new green hydrogen production economy. Of course, digitally enabled with all the digitalization aspects that Siemens has in its capabilities. So getting back to how do we keep our existing fleet? I mean, we talk about the energy transition, and it's important to remember that it is an energy transition. A lot of gas turbines are deployed and in operation. Siemens has an internal goal, actually not internal anymore, a publicly stated goal of having 100% of our gas turbines completely hydrogen compatible by the year 2030, so within 10 years. Many of them are significantly capable of burning hydrogen under current circumstances and with small changes to combustion systems, etc. So with retrofits, as well as with new devices, we can see a significant reduction in the overall CO2 emissions. An example of this type of project, making sure that we can demonstrate that it will work, we have a project called HyFlex Power in France. We're taking water and renewable energy from the grid, converting it to hydrogen through the electrolyzer, compressing, storing, blending it with natural gas, and re-electrifying it back to the grid. This is a demonstration project. You see our partners listed here on the right-hand side, with the idea being we can demonstrate it here. We can use it as a test and learn site for things like hydrogen combustion development, but also as a showcase for this power to power use case, as we call it, converting surplus renewable energy to long-term storage in the form of hydrogen and then re-electrifying. Another example of what we're doing to make this real is a project that we have with Duke Energy and Clemson University in South Carolina. Also a project that's similar to the previous one in the form of power to power, sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy, basically taking low-cost renewable power and converting it into a long-term, low-cost storage mechanism. One last project, the GET H2 Lingen project in Germany, the first industrial-scale hydrogen project in Germany. Project size, about 100 megawatt electrolyzer, with significant scope for Siemens Energy and, of course, multiple other partners in the area referenced here on the right. Okay, well, I definitely wanted to keep my comments brief. I'm happy to answer more questions in the chat or in the forum. But essentially what we see as the cornerstones of the future energy system: decarbonizing energy, sector coupling through hydrogen, power to X, so converting that hydrogen into other forms that may not be reused as power, for example, ammonia, as a basis for fertilizer. And we need to see, as some of the previous commentators have stated, a regulatory framework globally, also in Alberta, that promotes the use of hydrogen and the reduction of CO2 hand in hand. With that, I'll say thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions and the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. Great presentation. You know, it's very interesting to know what the technology giant like Siemens is doing and what's going on in Europe and other places. Maybe just for the time constraint, I will move to the next speaker. We will park the questions for the panel discussion. If you can go to the Q&A boxes to see any question directed to you, if you can type the answers directly, that would be helpful too. Okay, our next speaker is Bryan Helfenbaum. Bryan is the Executive Director at Advanced Carbons at Alberta Innovates. Many of us know about the institution. Responsible for recovery technologies, partial upgrading, digital oil field, and bitumen beyond combustion, etc. Bryan is also a theme lead for the Clean Resource Innovation Network and a fellow in the Energy Futures Lab. Prior to Alberta Innovates, he spent 20 years in technical business and innovation roles in industry, most recently as a technology manager at Devon Energy. Another engineer graduate with an MBA degree. Bryan has taught courses at the University of Calgary as well. Bryan will be talking about new applications of Alberta bitumen or bitumen beyond combustion. Bryan, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the kind intro, and it's a privilege to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see that. So yeah, this will be quite different. The previous presentations were all on hydrogen. This will be quite different, also more of a high-level market overview, given that the time constraints. So in order to talk about bitumen beyond combustion, we need to give a little bit of context into why we're even talking about it. And of course, the first B in BBC is bitumen. So let's talk about that. Alberta in Canada has a lot of bitumen. We currently produce about 3 million barrels a day. And in fact, we have so much bitumen that it places us third in the world in terms of our total proven oil reserves. And of course, these reserves and the oil sands have provided significant prosperity to the people of Alberta and Canada for a very long time and currently. But times, they are a-changing. Currently, forecasts, different scenarios for global oil demand show a change. And we can certainly debate how soon we're going to plateau and how quickly we're going to see a decline. And I think there's a great rigorous debate to be had there. But suffice it to say that the trajectory that we've seen over the last 30 years of continuous increase is not going to continue, or at least not going to continue for the next 30 more years. And so this is a result of vehicle electrification, of hydrogen, we've heard so much about, a huge opportunity, circular plastics economy, a whole bunch of different global trends are conspiring to make this into an eventual reality. And so this puts us into an interesting position. So Alberta is going to need new and expanded markets for this bitumen resource that we have a lot of. We want to maximize the value of that bitumen. We also need to reduce our greenhouse gases. And while industry has done a pretty good job at reducing upstream emissions, 80% of the emissions associated with bitumen and oil actually occur at combustion, or scope 3. And there isn't a lot out there right now to really look into that. We also want to diversify the economy so we can get away from the boom-bust cycles that we've endured in Alberta. Now, a challenge is that bitumen has a high molecular carbon content compared to other oils. So we'll come back to that in a moment, but that is one of the key characteristics of bitumen. Now, that's Alberta's needs. How about the globe? So globally, we are dealing with population growth. Over the next 30 years, we are going to grow the planet by about 2 billion people. That's about a quarter. To put that in context, that was the entire population of the planet only in the 1920s. So not that long ago. And we're going to grow by that again here in the next 30 years. In addition to population growth and additional prosperity, these populations are going to need energy products, which we're talking about, but they're also going to need materials for housing, transportation, infrastructure, and consumer goods. And if you look around you right now, what is it that a lot of the materials around you are actually made of but carbon? Now, we talk about this low carbon economy, but it's a bit of a misnomer. What we really mean when we say low carbon economy is keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. Carbon in solid form is sequestered and inert, and therein lies the opportunity. Can we turn bitumen's high molecular carbon intensity from a weakness, which it is when making energy products and fuels, into a strategic advantage for making materials, right? So that very characteristic that makes it poor for fuels makes it a significant opportunity for materials. And hence we have bitumen beyond combustion. Now, Alberta Innovates launched this opportunity back in 2017. We commissioned Dr. Axel Meisen to do a white paper looking at all the different products that you could conceptually make out of the oil sands. And these aren't just carbon intensive products, but also some metals and minerals and such. Now, not all of these are necessarily a good idea, but they're technically possible. So we followed that up the next year with a deeper dive into what we thought were the most promising opportunities. And many of these opportunities rely on this component of bitumen called asphaltene. Asphaltenes make up 15 to 20% of the barrel, and they are that heaviest component. They are what give bitumen that characteristic high viscosity, sticky, gooey stuff. And so we narrow it down to these top 5 products. Now, unfortunately, I only have 20 minutes, so I'm just going to address the first 2 products here, which are carbon fiber and asphalt binder. But there's certainly more BBC opportunity beyond that. So let's dive into carbon fiber. Now, many people are familiar with it. It's a class of materials. It's not a singular type, characterized by extremely strong strength, up to 10 times stronger than steel on a weight-to-weight basis. And perhaps more impressive is that it is non-corrosive. And so that makes it a basically universal building material with a whole bunch of different applications. You may be familiar with it in your golf clubs or your hockey stick or your bike. The biggest market is actually wind turbine blades and of course, aerospace and other. And so current production is a healthy 100,000 tons per year, growing at a very significant compound annual growth rate of 13% per year. But this is still pretty small when you compare it to materials like steel and other metals and plastics. So, it's still fairly niche, even though it's produced at 100,000 tons per year. Now, it's been well documented that if we can get the cost of carbon fiber down, then there are significant new markets to get into. In fact, it's been postulated that the market for carbon fiber could grow by 10 times basically overnight if the cost were cut in half. So let's talk about that. The current carbon fiber price runs around $18 to $35 a kilogram, depending on the performance specs that you need. The target to really start to unlock large-scale automotive use is $11 a kilogram, right? So roughly half, that's $5 a pound. Now, the challenge and the reason why this hasn't happened has to do with the feedstock that we use today for carbon fiber. And that feedstock is known as polyacrylonitrile or PAN. And PAN on its own costs $10 a kilogram. So obviously, it's pretty much impossible to hit a target of 11 when you're starting with a feedstock at 10 and you still have a lot of processing to do. On the other hand, bitumen-derived asphaltenes cost less than $1 per kilogram. So you immediately have a huge price opportunity. But that's not the only advantage when you compare bitumen-derived asphaltenes to PAN as a feedstock. The carbon yield is materially higher. The process is different. That would lend itself to better scaling. And a recent study by none other than co-panelist Dr. Kumar shows that the greenhouse gas emissions intensity would be less than half. Another really interesting opportunity has to do with the supply chain. So I'll give you an example. If you are fortunate enough to drive a high-end BMW, then you have a few carbon fiber parts in that vehicle. Now, where did those parts come from? Well, their story starts in the Middle East, where the hydrocarbons are produced. Those hydrocarbons are shipped to Japan, where they are converted into polyacrylonitrile. From Japan, it is shipped across the Pacific to Washington State in Moses Lake, where that PAN is converted into carbon fiber. And then that carbon fiber is shipped to Germany, where it is installed in a BMW. So a truly global supply chain with all of the inherent costs and emissions associated. Whereas if we talk about bitumen-derived asphaltenes, we have the feedstock here. We have huge manufacturing complexes in Ontario, Quebec, and as well as the US, of course. So if not a fully domestic, then at least a continental supply chain, which would be much more efficient. So let's talk about the potential here in dollars. So take a barrel of bitumen, we'll call it $30 a barrel is what the gross revenue potential is. Obviously right now it's a bit higher, but it wasn't long ago, as was pointed out earlier, that it was much, much lower. So say $30. Now, if all you did was separate out the asphaltenes as a feedstock for carbon fiber, then you already achieve a significant value add. That remainder of the barrel, the de-asphalted bitumen, is now a light oil that can move without diluent and fetches a higher price. And then the asphaltene feedstock itself, sells under $1 a kilogram, still a significant value add. But the real opportunity is to then spin that into carbon fiber. And even at $10 a kilogram, which is a steal for carbon fiber, there's a huge value add component. But that in and of itself is still just the tip of the iceberg, because we've seen around the world that when you introduce a material into a region, then the manufacturing that pops up all around by using that new feedstock can be 4 to 10 times more economic value than the feedstock fabrication itself. So overall, carbon fiber manufacture could generate between $10 to $15 billion per year in revenue, right? And you still have about 80% of that original barrel to sell for fuel products. Now, those are some lofty numbers. How real is this opportunity? So these pictures are a few years old. These were generated by Dr. Huaqing Chen out of the University of Alberta. And these are fibers spun out of asphaltenes. When we saw this a few years ago, we wanted to make sure we weren't drinking our own Kool-Aid. And we brought in a VP originally with SGL, now with Zoltec, who is the largest carbon fiber manufacturer in the world, and brought him in to visit the lab, and he was excited. The industry has been working on finding alternative feedstocks for decades and effectively made no progress looking at lignin and coal and other opportunities. And what he saw, he would describe as leapfrogging most of those opportunities very rapidly. And so the opportunity to generate this low-cost carbon fiber creates new market opportunities that are huge. So I've talked a bit about automotive, and that's kind of the poster child for low-cost carbon fiber going into every Honda Civic instead of just a few parts in a BMW. But there's even larger volume opportunities in reinforcement, composite materials of concrete and asphalt, buildings and piping, conductive coatings, rail. You can see the list. A picture's worth 1,000 words. On the right is the Dome of the Pantheon in Italy. It is 2,000 years old, made entirely of concrete and still standing. On the left is a site we see often. It is a bridge that is crumbling. It's only about 30, 40 years old, but the steel rebar that is used is corroding and causing issues. If we can replace that with a non-corrosive, strong material like carbon fiber, then we can build infrastructure that lasts much, much longer. So Alberta Innovates has been taking leadership in this. We launched the Carbon Fiber Grand Challenge about a year ago, and we've already completed phase 1. We are currently launching phase 2 and with plans for phase 3 to follow that at the end of next year. The overall goal is to have commercial scale carbon fiber production in Alberta before the end of the decade. A little bit about phase one. We funded 19 different projects. Dozens of patents are currently in progress. We've been, I'll say, building up some local capacity. You know, Canada doesn't really have a carbon fiber industry. And so through this program, we've been able to start to develop the expertise locally, as well as interfacing with experts in the US, Germany, and Australia. What's really exciting is that it's not just Dr. Chen that has shown success, but we have multiple researchers that have now spun fiber out of asphaltene. And they've taken different approaches, and that's really exciting to look at different pathways that could lead to potentially different products and different opportunities. Right now, we're in phase two. So this is just launching. We're going to have a press release in about 2 or 3 weeks with 12 projects that are being funded. And here we're really moving from a proof of concept to upping our performance capabilities. So if you look at the chart on the right, that bottom pink square is where the fiber we've been generating so far is falling. And that's okay. We're still in the proof of concept stage. But those red and blue dots represent the characteristics of commercial carbon fiber today. And what we need to be able to do is to get to this Roman numeral 2 shape in the middle. And that is the target for phase 2. That doesn't mean that we'll necessarily compete against the highest ends. You know, frankly, I'm not sure we'll ever create, you know, aerospace grade carbon fiber out of asphaltene, but we are very much in real and potentially new markets. The plan is to scale up from here, from phase 2 to phase 3, and move from grams per day to kilograms per day. Now, overall, right, carbon fiber represents huge potential for a multi-billion-dollar manufacturing industry in Alberta, and really a pan-Canadian opportunity. Bitumen-derived carbon fiber would have a lower greenhouse gas intensity. You saw less than half of typical incumbent carbon fiber. And what's really exciting is the emissions impact downstream of that. Because if we can create this low-cost carbon fiber, it will start getting used to lighten vehicles. And Dr. Kumar's recent study shows that, you know, 22 to 36% reduction in greenhouse gases from those lighter vehicles. We'll also create infrastructure that lasts longer. And of course, we don't have to keep repaving roads and rebuilding bridges. And that de-asphalted bitumen will be among the lowest greenhouse gas and lowest prices in the world compared to other oils. So a very strong competitiveness. So that's a lot about carbon fiber. I'm going to go a little quicker through asphalt binder. So I'll say in terms of the sexy spectrum, this is at the opposite end of carbon fiber. Everyone is familiar with asphalt. We drive on it, we play tennis on it, it's on roofs, and of course it's sourced from petroleum. And this is not a new idea per se. Alberta's been producing asphalt binder for local use for decades through mostly two large facilities. But the opportunity really falls to expand that market. So first of all, the quality of bitumen-derived asphalt binder is not very well known. It is actually, according to research done out of Queen's University by a world-renowned asphalt expert, Alberta bitumen has the second best performance in the world when it comes to making asphalt, surpassed only by Venezuelan crude, which is getting harder and harder to get your hands on. So we really have a premium product here, and it's known in Canada, but not very well known outside of that. But the problem is we don't really have a way to get it to larger markets because asphalt is shipped in molten form at high temperature, and it's not economical to move it long distances. So we need a better method of doing that, and that's where the technology development comes in. We also think that there is a global asphalt shortage coming in a net zero world. So if you think back to that first slide where I showed the projections for global oil demand, we're going to see that oil demand is falling off, oil supply is going to fall off because of the reduced need for transportation fuels. But as much as we may not need transportation fuels in the same numbers in the future, we're still going to need asphalt. Doesn't matter what is fueling those vehicles, they still need to drive on something. And at some point we have a crossover where we no longer have enough oil production to meet asphalt needs. So the goal here is to substantially increase production to service primarily North American and Southeast Asian customers. The value add opportunity is not quite as dramatic as the carbon fiber one, but is still a very healthy amount of value added to the barrel by creating asphalt. There are multiple companies right now working on transportation at ambient temperatures, either pelletization of the bitumen or pelletization of the asphalt binder itself. Now, Solidium is a local example. This is a University of Calgary spinoff, and they are currently working on a 1,000 barrel a day pilot. We also commissioned a market study performed by ADI Analytics out of Texas to look at how are we actually going to access these markets. And there's a couple of screenshots here. The study is available on our website, so anybody can download it. And effectively looking at, if we have this premium product, which jurisdictions are actually going to pay for a premium product and where would they deploy it? And it starts to speak to, how are we actually going to perform a market entry into these areas once we're able to transport it at ambient temperatures. Okay, so I've gone pretty quickly, but don't have a lot of time. I'm going to finish with 2 quick slides for the 2 most common questions I get. So question 1 is, Bryan, hey, what is the best BBC product? And of course, it depends how you define the word best. In terms of product value, vanadium, which is used for flow batteries, has the $30 per kilogram, but it only makes up 200 parts per million of the barrel. So if by best you're trying to divert as much of the barrel as possible towards non-combustion, then vanadium isn't terribly effective. But of course, you can do that in combination with some of these other products. Now, all of these opportunities are better than selling raw bitumen, raw dilbit, as we do today. The other question I get all the time is when? When is this going to be a reality? When can I go to Home Depot and buy some carbon fiber reinforced plywood for my deck? Well, not yet, which is what you always hear from innovation presentations. And of course, it depends on the product. So asphalt is an example where the R&D phase is moving along quite well, and we have some large pilots underway, and we'll probably finish within the next couple of years. But the validation of asphalt is a longer issue because municipalities aren't going to just trust a couple of lab reports and say that it's a premium product. They're going to take some asphalt binder, they're going to pave a section of road and then drive on it for 5 years to make sure that it actually does perform as expected with their humidity, with their temperature swings and their traffic. On the other hand, carbon fiber has a longer runway on R&D. So lots of exciting things going on here, but we're still at the grams per day stage. So we still need about 4 years to get to a sanction type of decision. And then fortunately, the validation phase can be a lot quicker because you can deploy that into products and test them much more rapidly. And of course, we will ultimately find a lot of new applications for this low-cost feedstock. So key takeaways, bitumen is a feedstock that has these essential components for high-performance carbon materials, and that includes graphene and carbon nanotubes that a net zero emissions world needs. There is a very significant value uplift as well as an emissions reduction by making these BBC products. And we can activate a downstream manufacturing industry, not just in Alberta, but across Canada. And at the end of the day, it's blasphemous to some to say it, but bitumen represents a pathway to a low carbon economy. It's not the pathway. Hydrogen has a significant role. There's lots of, well, not lots, but there's a short list. But BBC, bitumen, is a significant opportunity to get us to a low carbon economy. So that's all I had. Thank you very much. Back to you, Max.
Thank you, Bryan. And I shall say that your presentation definitely has given the dark bitumen a bright silver lining, eye-opening and very encouraging, particularly music to my ears, because my career has a lot of intimate relationships with carbon fiber as a reinforcement or asphalt or that stuff. Now I reveal what I used to do. Anyhow, there is one question regarding the temperature at which to spin the H14 carbon fiber. Maybe you can go to the answer, or if you know the number. Okay.
I'll look at it. Unfortunately, some of the technical details are still very confidential, but I will see what I can say.
Yeah, but again, thanks, and for the time constraint, well, thank you for sticking to your time allocation. And let's move to our next presenter. That would be Dr. Eric Tang. Eric, I call him a true technical expert in his field, obtained his Ph.D. in chemical and materials engineering from University of Calgary, University of Alberta. Sorry. It's a good university. Another equally good university. He has 20 plus years of industrial experience in developing solid oxide fuel cell, SOFC, for power generation and solid oxide electrolysis cell, SOEC technologies for hydrogen generation. In his current position as the Senior Research and Development Manager at Fuelcell Energy Calgary, he is leading both functional and project teams in developing SOFC, SOEC technologies through lab experiments, pilot trials, all the way to production. As expected, he will be talking about solid oxide electrolysis cell development in Alberta for the future of hydrogen. Eric, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I just share my screen. So you guys see the screen okay?
Yep.
Right. So yeah, thank you very much, Max, again, and thank you for all of the previous 5 speakers. I learned a lot and take lots of notes. And there's a lot of past crossover, including the last one. I'm just wondering why Professor Wei-Shen Chen is not doing fuel cell anymore. He's doing spin the carbon fibers now. Okay, so I myself is a visual learner. So when we're talking about the hydrogen futures, and I try to borrow a roadmaps and future hydrogen in energy structure, where the hydrogen will stands. And this is the roadmaps from US Department of Energy and ERE study. And they place the future hydrogen into as one of 2 pillars, and in parallel to the electrical grid, and to highlight the importance of which way our economy is going to finally move into. And if I get a little bit more details and into that, and basically you have not only the 2 pillars, the electrical grid and also the hydrogen, but also you place the renewables, nuclear, fossil fuels with CCUS, and also into this map, including the current gas infrastructures and transportations and all the others. I'll probably touch some of them in more details later on. And so we all, the previous speaker all speaks to the importance and how we're going to move into this past. There's something I'd like to also emphasize it. And this is a prediction for the future, of course, take a grain of salt. And they believe by the 2050s, the overall hydrogen sector could generate about $2.5 million per year. That's about half of today's overall oil gas industry's revenue and about 30 million jobs. And also, as from Alberta perspective, I know Professor Kumar has also talked about it quite a bit, and large-scale hydrogen production and also deployment from various commercial application aspects, and we hear that also from Jason, and it's already starting happening today. And some of the intentions, some of the multi-million-dollar deals, intents, and hopefully Alberta will, with the rest of the world, moving towards that directions. Now, in the center of this future energy map, and you can see the linkage between the electrical grid and the hydrogen is among the green box I placed over there. One is the hydrogen generation aspect, and that links from making from the electricity and making hydrogen. The other side is the hydrogen can also turn into power generation and feed back into the grid. And this is the aspect where I'm going to share with the audience today. So Max asked me to get a little bit more details about the fuel cells, provide some fundamentals. I know we've been already, this is the last talk, and I borrow a cartoon and just talk about a little bit more detail into the mechanism between the fuel cells. And this cartoon is more illustrated how the PEM cell works. And basically, you have hydrogen moving from the fuel tanks, get into the to the anode side of a electrochemical cell. Fuel cell basically is an electrochemical energy conversion devices, just like a battery. And when you get into the anode side, strip the electrons and moving from the electrical circuit makes the electricity. Meanwhile, the ions, the hydrogen ions moving from anode side to cathode side combine with oxygen, making water. As water is the exhausted out. Of course, there's many different kind of hydrogen. But the overall reaction is hydrogen plus the oxygen making water, and converting this those chemical energy into electrical energy, and as you show here, and so. But just like the combustion engine is a little bit different than the battery, is a fuel cell be able to continue making powers. You don't need the charging and discharging cycles to store the chemical energy at the electrode or electrolyte, and you can continue produce power. But different than the internal combustion engine is you don't have moving parts. So it is electrochemical reaction, has a high efficiency, and you don't burn the fuel. So the other aspect is, so what is electrolyzer? So this fuel cell, and if you operate reversely, and you become electrolyzer, and you'll be able to convert the electrical energy back into chemical energy and making hydrogens. So type of fuel cells is in general, or type of the electrolyzers can usually depends on their electrolyte. And for example, solid oxide fuel cells use ceramic as electrolyte. Typically is yttrium stabilized zirconia as electrolyte, and usually operating at a high temperature like 650 degrees Celsius to about 1,000 degrees Celsius. And PEM fuel cell is a much lower temperature. Usually is at probably 70 to 160 degrees C, and as a high end. And phosphoric acid fuel cells, which is more matured fuel cells, and but again, because of their operating temperatures and also their efficiency and lower power density, and then starting to slowly phase out. And on the other fuel cell which is not really a solid is phosphoric acid and molten carbonate fuel cell. Molten carbonate fuel cell is about 600 degrees to 650 degrees Celsius operating temperature, but because of this characteristics of their efficiency and power density and operating temperature, and each there has their advantage and disadvantages. And because also the historical reason, and some fuel cell is more maturely developed than the others, and for high temperature fuel cells, usually speaking, you need a much less fuel processing. You can directly using the natural gas as a fuel, or even ammonia as fuel, and just a simply process, and the reforming process can be happened at the anode itself to producing power, such as solid oxide fuel cell and the molten carbonate fuel cell. At the lower end of the temperature, when you're getting lower, it definitely needs more fuel processing. And in terms of PEM fuel cell, is also very sensitive to the CO. A small amount of a CO, talking about 10 ppm, can poison the PEM fuel cell. And also, the lower the temperature, you more need an expensive catalyst, like platinum catalyst, to facilitate the kinetic and the process, half half reaction process. So this talk, I'm going to more concentrate on the solid oxide cell technology and compare with other three types of the fuel cells electrolyzer technology. This is less mature, still in the development stage. And Chris talked about, for example, much larger 17.5 megawatts is a PEM-based electrolyzer, and this is almost towards the final stage for commercialization. And solid oxide cell technology is more still in the development stage and for the small demonstration stage. And basically, just like other fuel cell electrolyzer, it's electrochemical devices, but it is using the energy conversion devices, use solid oxides as an oxygen ion conductor and as electrolyte. So those cells usually operating at a much higher temperature. In fuel cell operations, solid oxide fuel cell can convert the chemical fuel and the natural gas, ammonia, hydrogen to electricity. In electrolysis operation, solid oxide fuel cell can operating as a solid oxide electrolysis cell, can converting the electricity and the water to producing hydrogen. Just when the previous speaker talking about that, probably there's one more adding benefits is solid oxide electrolysis cell can also electrolyze the CO2 and produce CO, and also is capable of doing that. But in addition to that, it also can integrate the renewable production of electricity and hydrogen into one unit. And by operating when there is excess amount of power, you can use the electrolyzer, SOEC, to convert it into hydrogen and store the hydrogen or dumping the hydrogen into the pipeline. And when the power is called for example, at night when sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, you can convert chemical energy back into electricity. So what's the advantage of solid oxide electrolysis cells? So basically it's a very high conversion efficiency. That's a result of the thermodynamics and the kinetics at a higher SOEC operating temperature. And as you see, and the energy requirement to electrolysis of water is different than energy requirement to electrolysis steam at above 100 degrees Celsius. That's first. Second is the amount of the high operating temperature, also the kinetically helping to have very high current density. At our lab, we even be able to demonstrate that operating a solid oxide electrolysis cell at 6 amps per square centimeter areas. But in addition, also you'll be able to use waste heat and to reduce the requirement for electricity. To making the same, you can convert the heat energy into the chemical energy as well. This is one example, as we usually call the VI curve and the voltage and the current curves, and across the open circuit voltage. At the right side are the fuel cell operation. At the left side are electrolysis operation. All the PEM-based or low temperature-based fuel cell water electrolysis, you have jumping voltage from the fuel cell through the OCV towards electrolysis operation. That's because of the water electrolysis versus the steam electrolysis difference. But also the overall internal resistance is usually speaking is higher than the high temperature SOEC operations. So this is one of the recent demo, we just demonstrate a very small SOEC units. As you can see, because we be able to utilize the heat for this units to generate hydrogen, our overall and the stack electrical efficiency at HHV is above 100%, at 112%. Even the system, because it will be able to utilize heat, overall electrical efficiency is also above 100%. And if you don't just counting the electrical efficiency, and it's still close to 92%. And that is a significant difference between the SOEC and compare with the PEM-based lower temperature electrolysis operation. So in addition to the past advantage, there are two more advantage, and you'll be able to using the SOC based technology to do electricity for hydrogen generation. One is the SOEC stand up well with dynamic load operation, and those are the conditions for fluctuation of the power levels. For example, the when to flowing the output of the wind powered generation. In our lab, we tested this for 20-minute cycle and over 6,000 cycles, and mimic about 15 years of a daily cycle, and be able to place this kind of system in the field. And the other advantage, and it's called the SOEC be able to thermally integrate it with a range of chemical synthesis and enable the recycling of captured CO2 and the water into the e-natural gas, gasoline, methanol, ammonia, such as that, and be able to so it's meshed well with the future economy, how to produce those synthetic fuels and use the renewable and the electricity produce the CO and syngas, CO and the hydrogens. But the pathway, just like different than the current matured hydrogen generation method, the pathway from materials research to cell development, stack development, system development, demonstration to place into field, it will take a very long duration and efforts to from the lab to the field. So just a little bit of talking back to our efforts and our development in Calgary, and we are Calgary based. The headquarters of our company is based in Connecticut, United States, Danbury, very close to New York. And we do have a manufacturing plant in Torrington and in Germany. And Calgary is only have a small R&D facility. And but this facility is solely based on the solid oxide fuel cell and the solid oxide electrolysis and studies and development. So this is a facility, and we're located, we have about 32,000 square foot located in the Foothill Industrial Park. And our main focus, and we employ material scientists, mechanical engineer, chemical engineers, and the technicians and electrical engineers. And but we're also leading from not only the lab research, material development for the electrolyte and the basic cells and the stack designs, but also we have a cell and a stack pilot production plant, and including we utilize the more conventional ceramic manufacturing process and some also some of the semiconductor and the wafer process, manufacturing process to fabricate the cell and putting together stack. And we also has an extensive testing facility, probably one of the largest in the world for high temperature, the SOEC and the SOFC testings in Calgary. So, and the SOEC research basically in Calgary is started much later compared with the fuel cell research. And we started from 2009, and that's the first time we are looking into the reversibility of the SOFC operation. And 2011, and we got a DOE, U.S. Department of Energy, and the ERE funding, and starting to do the project on the SOFC and SOEC cyclic studies. And 2014, we got a DARPA, U.S. Department of Defense DARPA project working with Boeing, and to develop a first unique and reversible systems, and using the SOFC plus SOEC and energy storage, hydrogen storage, and units, and demonstrated in 2016. And in the meanwhile, the fuel cell is also our solar oxide fuel cell business also made it into large area and getting into about 200 kilowatt demonstration. And this is a demonstrated, finished demonstration in 2019 in Pittsburgh. And currently our main focus is trying to have a common units, common stack, use the same cell, and producing the common stack for both SFC and SOEC operation, and which can feed into all three types of commercial application, including the power generation, hydrogen generation, and energy storage. And as indicated in this green box, and feed into trying to building the bridge between those two pillars of electrical grid and hydrogen. So just the two examples and the project right now we are actively currently working on. One is trying to demonstrate a high efficiency prototype of SOEC system at Iowa National Lab. This is a DOE DOE lab, and traditionally they are more linked towards the nuclear power aspect, and they are looking for have a 150 kilogram per day and hydrogen production from this 270 kilowatt SOEC units, and trying to link this one with the nuclear power plant and electricity and steam, and trying to demonstrate high efficiency with or without thermal output, and trying to provide even without thermal output, trying to reach about 91 over 90% of the efficiencies. And going forward, the vision of this project going forward is for 50 megawatt in electrolysis units and link into together for 1 gigawatts and for fully be able to link with a medium-sized nuclear power plant. The other project we're currently working on is a 1 megawatt RSFC. When we're talking about the RSOC, is reversible, so it's energy storage, and it's linking our units, be able to operating same stack, same units, operating both at the fuel cell and the electrolysis operation, and store the water and the hydrogen. And in this sense, most recently we talk a lot about we even be able to store the hydrogen in the pipeline, natural gas pipeline, and to further improve the storage duration for hydrogens. And this is right now we directly compare with a lithium battery based energy storage. And for example, if you look in the chart here, for lithium battery, current state of lithium battery in terms of cost per kilowatt hour at a various duration, and is demonstrated in this black lines. And they project the future cost after cost reduction at 2030 is in this gray dotted line. And we are trying to putting together units meets this green line with the future larger units to meet this blue lines. As you can see, anything below 4 hours, definitely we are this RSOC based the energy storage probably cannot compare with the lithium battery in terms of cost because of initial cost. But when the duration increase beyond the 4 hours, and the lithium ion battery, you have to adding more battery modules to increase the capacity. And for this, for RSFC based system, all you need to do is store water and hydrogen, and you increase the storage units, or maybe even to use the natural gas pipeline as hydrogen storage. That's pretty much all I want to share today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Tang. Very fascinating presentation on the cutting edge technology. I will be very pleased over the next while to organize a trip to visit your lab in the factory.
You're welcome. Yeah, please. I definitely will host your visit.
Yeah. Before we move to the next session, Bryan has a plane to catch. He probably signed up already. Is Bryan still here? Okay. I shall apologize to the panelists and all the attendees for the time delay, but thank you very much for sticking with us. It means the program quality is really first top notch, and everybody enjoyed it, definitely myself. Corinne, can we set up for our next segment of the program, a panel discussion? We'll see how long we can let it last. By the questions shown in the Q&A boxes. I encourage everyone to visit the Q&A, particularly those answer the questions, and see if anything interests to you or your question has been answered. Is everybody on? Corinne? I think Brian has to sign off to catch a plane.
Yes, I try to turn on all the.
Hello, everyone. Maybe I'll get started. I can ask a dumb question or inappropriate question for this forum. Where is the echo? That is, we have lots of friends, I think, in the audience who are in the oil and gas industry. My question is, are we running too fast towards the future? Of course, there's no doubt that we are moving towards a green economy, and we have reached the point of no return. But I mean, have we set the short or midterm green targets too aggressively? The transition maybe is longer. The reason I'm asking this question is my simple engineer's observation on a few things. One, the record natural gas price spike in Asia last winter to $25 and the electricity shortage in China due to a cold spell. Two, the current electricity shortage in China already. By the way, China's electricity usage saw a double-digit increase over last year. I don't think this trend will stop. Three, oil price is at an 8-year high right now. Are we heading to a more short-term energy chaos or crisis? Dr. Kumar, you can start.
Okay, thanks for your question. I mean, my kind of thought process when we talk a lot about renewables is this is jurisdiction specific too. In some places, you see renewables being used for electricity generation, and those are on commercial scale, large commercial scale. Penetration is much higher. But on the other side, when we talk about oil and gas here, the transition would be a little bit slow. And probably you're looking at more closer to, in the time frame of 2035 to 2050, we're seeing some kind of decline and transition towards more renewables coming in. Some of our, for example, some of our analysis basically shows in terms of renewables forming a big share of power generation in Alberta by 2050. So a lot of penetration through wind and then the other renewable sources. But I think currently, my sense is that the transition would be a little bit slow than what is being projected. A lot of forums.
I mean, Ken, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about the energy composition. Do you have any opinion on that? Are we moving too fast? I think, in my opinion, is Alberta oil and gas sector would still have a long way to go. We are not going to be abandoned very soon. All the other panelists, do you have a yes or no answer? Or simple?
Simple, no. I mean, we have to move as quickly as we can. I mean, there's an old adage: the best cure for high oil prices is high oil prices. High oil prices and high fossil fuel prices, although they raise prices for everybody, which is a bad thing, they also create, they close the green premium gap. When you're looking at a business case based on renewables, you're always comparing it to conventional fossil fuel, and this is where the price of carbon fits in. I mean, anybody can build their business case if they know what the price of carbon is, because they've monetized the aspects of major concern. So having a high conventional energy price makes the expensive renewable options less expensive by comparison. Doesn't mean they're less expensive, but the gap is less. So it provides an incentive to find alternatives to the existing energy system. Are we moving too fast? I think it's important to have high ambitions. I don't think we're moving fast enough. If we look at the Canadian Hydrogen Strategy's anticipated demand for hydrogen, we would need how many? Something like 1,000 Site C dams if we were to produce all the hydrogen demand from hydro renewables. So there are going to be aspects of the system that are able to move quickly, and there are going to be aspects of the system that move very slowly. Certainly in hydrogen, I was looking at the supply side. We're seeing, as I mentioned in my presentation, inquiries for hydrogen projects in the multi-hundreds of megawatts, putting out thousands of tons of green hydrogen. But do we have demand on the decarbonized mobility side for that much hydrogen? No. So there's going to be aspects that are moving at different times. But I think it's important to move as quickly as we can. I mean, again, this is not an arbitrary goal that we've set. This is these are estimations based on climate modeling and climate science of what's going to happen if we don't act. So I think it's imperative to keep moving.
Thank you. The other fellows, give me a yes or no answer. Too fast or just okay?
I think eventually this is to be decided by the consumers, right? And you're moving towards. One example I can think of is hydrogen cost. And today in California, which in North America, you only have a limited market, has hydrogen filling stations and along the coastlines of California. People paying about $15 to $18 a kilo of the hydrogens. And even it doesn't matter, it's gray hydrogen, it's green hydrogen, it's blue hydrogen, it's $18 a kilo of hydrogen. A 500 kilometer range, you need about $90 to fill the car with. And that's definitely limits the penetration of the fuel cell vehicles. And how we move fast or not fast, in lots of cases, it is we already established the infrastructure. It takes a long time to take it down. China is a good example. There are over 50% of the power came from the coal. And it will take a while to displace those current assets. And the same thing happened to Alberta. It's the overall direction we're moving. It is about right. But again, when we reach there, and I'm not optimistic, say, and the current target, it's absolutely will be reached by then.
Okay, thank you. Again, I need to clarify my question. I don't mean we shouldn't run as fast as we could. We just say the short-term pain is going to be severe if we just set two kind of aggressive targets. Anyhow, I think we got a good inspiration. Our next question was raised by one of the audience and a few others. Probably be directed towards Ken, Amit, and Chris. The question is, have we compared economic study of electricity transmission, which means generating electricity from hydrogen at the source versus piping hydrogen to consumers where they generate electricity, for example, in North America? Of course, we are not talking about intercontinental. Who want to pick that first? Maybe Chris. Siemens, I think, is in the energy transmission, and also talking about infrastructure. Is that something, a debate the industry will need to come to consensus or economic kind of settlement?
Well, let me just see if I understood the question. We're talking about converting renewable energy to hydrogen, storing the hydrogen, and then the question is, do we transport or transmit the hydrogen to a consumer for use or potentially re-electrification, or do we create electricity from that hydrogen and then transmit that?
Right. They said electricity, say, to Florida versus hydrogen to Florida.
Well, it's I mentioned in my presentation, I think some of the other speakers can probably back this up. We have existing infrastructure to transport gaseous substances. We can convert hydrogen into methane in methanation processes, and we can have it just be a drop-in substitute for methane. Of course, that doesn't sequester the carbon. It just makes it carbon neutral if you're using carbon that would otherwise be emitted into the atmosphere. So transmitting the molecules, I think, is a very cost-effective way to move energy around. Electricity is a specific form of energy. It's got very beneficial uses, right? You can run your laptop computer on electricity. You can't run it on hydrogen, but you can heat your home with electricity, and you can heat your home with hydrogen. So it's really a question of what is the end use, and what is the customer willing to pay. Typically, people are more willing to pay for a more refined product that can do more things, like electricity. I was just doing a back of the envelope calculation to make a point earlier today, and I think I paid $10,000 a kilowatt hour for some electricity I bought recently. It was in the form of a quadruple A battery to power a pen for my tablet, but I paid $10,000 a kilowatt hour for the energy in that battery. And so if the question is, do we want to transport the hydrogen to a consumer for them to re-electrify it, then we're talking about a huge infrastructure of distributed electricity generation. I think we need to keep in mind, what are the different forms of energy and what are we using them for, and what is the customer going to be willing to pay? So I think the short answer is, for heating, for thermal uses, transporting the molecule is probably the best way to go. And then for more sophisticated uses like driving motors, for air conditioning and other sort of motor-driven applications, then transporting the electricity to the customer would be the best way to go. I'll leave it to the other panelists to respond further.
Yeah, and just to add on Chris's side, I mean, if you're thinking about renewables, like any of these renewables coming from solar and wind, we always go back and think about the storage too. And hydrogen is thought of as a storage medium to transmit that energy from where it is produced to where it is consumed. So transmission of electricity per se, first, it would be expensive compared to any of these molecules that I would say over longer distances. And then this hydrogen is itself a medium which will help in any of these transport to a reasonable distance. I mean, that's the way to look at it. The other key thing I would say, that transporting energy, I mean, you're talking about here, the flexibility with any of the molecules or hydrogen is in terms of you can go from one continent to another continent in that form. So again, it is for transporting energy. I mean, molecules are cheaper compared to long distance and high voltage transmission lines per unit of energy transported.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think another consideration will be, what is the existing infrastructure? If you've got large transmission lines to a certain market, no pipeline, will probably transmit as electricity. If you've got large empty pipelines like Canada has, where we used to send a lot of gas to Eastern Canada in the US, we could convert those and pipeline to those markets. I think a lot of it's going to be, what is the existing infrastructure to facilitate the type of energy transmission?
That definitely makes sense. I mean, different countries will have to look at it differently. Maybe we can move on to the next thing. Can I mention to you, in China, I think there's another school of thought regarding transmission of hydrogen over a long distance. That is the medium of either ammonia or methanol. I suppose, Zhen, you have heard about it. We heard you too, Amit, talking about ammonia. What do you think of potential of methanol?
I think there are different technologies, and but hydrogen has a unique advance that is it is a totally solution because in long-term or large-scale storage, transportation, or uses, it's a universal solution. You know, that's different. But in a lot of cases, for example, my business partner do ammonia, and the project is successful. But in the whole picture, I think hydrogen has is unique, especially gases.
No, I mean, use ammonia or methanol as intermediate to transport essentially hydrogen from Alberta, say, to Shanghai or to Tokyo. From a chemical engineering point of view, I know Mitsubishi Heavy Industrial is deep into ammonia turbines for ships already.
A lot of experts doing research of ammonia, but in real project, hydrogen is still in a good position. For example, in China, if we within China, we suggest a large scale pipeline for hydrogen gas.
I try to compare methanol with ammonia. Can you, as a chemical engineer, what do you say?
So with the issue with methanol is you still got the carbon molecule that's going to get emitted.
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way that you can, if you're using a fuel cell, for example, you will have the carbon much more concentrated, which is a big piece of the sequestration and capturing. Ammonia, I think, is very interesting in the fact that there's multiple routes to use it. You can burn it as a fuel. You can use it in a gas turbine, burning it in a gas turbine. You can dissociate it. So there's a lot of work going on catalysts to basically decompose it back to nitrogen and hydrogen. So you can service a hydrogen market. And there's direct ammonia fuel cells doing the same thing. So I think there's a lot of work in this area. But when I think of the energy density of trying to get hydrogen from one continent to the other, it is very difficult.
Yeah, and if I can add that some of our analysis says, so if we are looking at hydrogen production, so one pathway is transporting hydrogen to Asia Pacific and comparing that with converting it to ammonia and then transporting ammonia all the way to Asia Pacific and especially Japan. We look at the ammonia in terms of dollar per kg of hydrogen. You get about 26 to 27% benefit in terms of cost. So transporting ammonia is lower, about 26 to 27% compared to hydrogen. So there is a potential of looking at ammonia and transporting ammonia on larger scale.
But is that there's also energy needed to produce ammonia? You need a high temperature, high pressure to produce it.
If you take all of that into account, some of the benefits also comes in terms of liquefaction because hydrogen will need the per unit energy of liquefying hydrogen is much more compared to ammonia. And the pipeline transport is also different. So, taking all that into account, the whole supply chain, you're still looking at benefit of about 26 to 27%.
Well, and I think if you look at the way ammonia plants are designed today, they use partial oxidation, but they do it at the back end of the plant. And it's not to supply the energy heat, it's to burn up the oxygen to get the pure nitrogen that's left over. If you redesigned an ammonia plant so that your oxidation happened out front, and you used all that energy and weren't having a lot of that oxygen burning up the hydrogen that you just made. If you looked at the autothermal reformer, it's the partial oxidation happens first, then the reforming. If you look at an ammonia plant, you have a steam methane reformer followed by a secondary reformer with an air fired instead of oxygen. And that's how they add the nitrogen to get the nitrogen hydrogen mix. I think in a world of carbon capture, what you're going to do is you're going to move that secondary reformer out front, and you're actually going to put enriched air. So you balance the amount of oxygen to get the amount of heat input. You balance the amount of nitrogen that you need to make ammonia. We just haven't rethought the way we're designing plants for carbon capture. If I was going to redo a plant, I would do it completely different. I mean, reforming was not designed for carbon capture, but it is ideal for carbon capture.
So still a lot of opportunities looking into the kind of intercontinental hydrogen transportation.
Well, and one of the opportunities in methanol is that methanol, obviously methane and methanol have the same number of hydrogens. And as I was showing you in the chemistry, there's a lot of hydrogen coming from a water molecule. In a methanol plant, that hydrogen is just burned. It's not saved and used as a cleaner fuel. But it does make the carbon emissions down with autothermal, that it gets very low carbon emissions as a source of fuel.
Now, I suppose another debate we hear quite often is hydrogen fuel cell for vehicles. I don't think it's a question. It's a huge advantage for large vehicles from buses to trucks. Hyundai has already mass-produced trucks, but for passenger vehicle, there are quite a bit of a debate. I understand in China, one is the safety. Can you allow a hydrogen car parked in underground parking? The answer right now is no. And what's your view of a potential for future? Other than Toyota, Hyundai, not many other kind of car manufacturers has poured as much money into hydrogen fuel cell as in electric cars. Any comments?
I think one of the applications for hydrogen and fuel cells and electric cars is going to be, can you do that conversion as it's needed to do rapid charging on cars? Go direct DC to DC, hydrogen fuel cell. So I visited a company called Blue Energy in California, and they've got an interesting technology that they're developing for that, where they can go direct natural gas fuel cell to rapid charging electrical vehicles. And we've got to work that whole infrastructure for electrical cars to work. And I see people converting to electrical cars faster than we're building the infrastructure to support everybody converting to electric cars.
During the holiday season in China, people waited for 4 or 5 hours to get a 1 hour charger. Otherwise, yeah.
That's why I work on hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Yeah. And for Canada, it's cold, so it's more suitable for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles than electric cars.
So in some of your opinion, the hydrogen fuel cell has a huge potential for passenger cars?
In the later, now is focused on trucks and commercial buses or trucks.
Energy, yeah.
Larger amount of the energy and go distance compared with batteries. Yeah. small fuel cell vehicles, and right now Toyota has a production vehicle and has a fleet over 1,000 is running. It's people buy it and service it, and the results, I think it's comparatively speaking, compared with the Tesla's electrical vehicle, is not as well reviewed.
One of the aspects regarding the passenger vehicles is that when we see projections in terms of penetration of these electrical vehicles compared to the fuel cell vehicles, all the projections currently shows that you will have much larger market share of these electrical vehicles down the road by 2050. And the other aspect to think about that is, if we are moving, let's say, more fuel cell vehicle, if you provide incentives for fuel cell vehicles, the challenge is, what are you shifting to in terms of GHG mitigation? You are shifting probably the renewable energy, which could directly feed into these passenger cars. You are trying to convert that to hydrogen and then to the vehicles. On a net comparative analysis, this might result in increase of GHG emission, net GHG system level GHG emission increase. So I think based on the current situation and as the technology develops, the sense is more the passenger cars would be more electric vehicles, and they will have much larger market share 20, 30 years down the road.
Yeah. There's some special applications. For example, forklift for the fulfillment center. Like Walmart, Amazon, they get those plug powers and PEM-based is the hydrogen-filled forklift, because they can run pretty much 24/7 and with very little fueling times. That works very well.
Maybe I'll ask Wei to go over some of the questions, whether you have answered in typing or any kind of commonly interested questions. Can you bring up one or two for the panel?
Okay. Thank you for our speakers, because you have answered most of the questions. So the rest of them, I suppose those are difficult ones. So here, let's try to start answering that. So first one, as CCUS is an essential element in the global energy transition to net zero by 2050. What is the Alberta government doing to entice investments in CCUS?
Any government incentives?
Yeah, I guess that's a question for the government.
Professor, do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I should add that the Alberta government did invest a lot of money in CCUS, where like $2 billion of investment, and that led to some of these demonstration projects. And so, you know, there is support from the Alberta government in terms of getting the CCUS and helping Alberta become one of the leaders. So that's what I think, that they have been supportive of CCUS and have put dollars in developing the technology.
Yeah, and the government has put a lot of money into the Quest project, got a lot of government funding.
Yeah.
The concern will be, as there's a race for the pore space for injecting and sequestering carbon, will they give it to a few big companies? And will they then use that as a market advantage? And I think there's going to be a race here in the next few years. So there's a contest going on right now where the government's looking to create sequestration hubs and companies are bidding for it.
And I should say that even not only at the provincial level, federal level also, there is recent announcement in terms of support for CCUS demonstration projects. I think it's more than $300 million, $350 million, basically showing the intent to support these CCUS activities. So the governments, both the levels, are supporting the CCUS activities.
I think government is very important. It will make the project make sense. And it can give us policy and tax and something like that. Otherwise, I think a lot of CCS project is not suitable.
Another industrial area I was kind of close to in my earlier career is railways. In North America, contrary to the rest of the world, has virtually zero mileage of electrification of railways. All the locomotives are diesel. I know Canadian Pacific is busy working on hydrogen fuel cell locomotive. The protocol will be coming out probably soon. What's your view of their opportunity? Per my discussion with some of the executives of railway in North America, they felt a huge pressure on them already. Are they going to electrify the lines, or are they going? Are they jumping to the fuel cells?
Well, in the GTA, there was recently a Metrolink study concluded a couple of years ago where hydrogen commuter trains were considered, and the cost was actually close to parity with an electrified system, but the risks were considered too high. So I don't know. In Alberta, they're talking about a Calgary to Banff train. Some people are talking about a hydrogen-powered train there, but I think you're right. I mean, if you go to Europe, about half of the trains are electrified. So fuel cells can certainly help in those areas that are difficult to electrify, and I think electrification is also so geography dependent too. How harsh are the winters? How much precipitation and risk of ice is there? Right? It's really a business case assessment, and I don't think there's any easy answer right now. Siemens Energy is working with Ballard on a hydrogen fuel cell powered train in Germany, operating. Not in commercial operation, but being tested right now. I know our competitor Alstom has an operating fuel cell train operating in Italy. But VIA has just bought Siemens trains that are diesel electric. So it really is a question of, we want to see the energy transition accelerate, but the age-old question is who's going to pay for it? And it really often does come down to the business case and the justification for additional expense.
Do you guys have a question for each other? Or something you think we should have discussed? I don't want to encroach too much of our dinner time. Maybe we'll give another 5 minutes.
Yeah, like I said in the introduction, I think I'm probably taking away a lot more than I'm bringing to the table. It's been great to hear all the other participants speak. I certainly picked up a lot of information. So thanks again for the invitation to be part of it.
Oh, thank you. No, I mean, if not, Bryan sent his apology. If anybody got questions regarding, the Alberta Innovates work to help Alberta Bitumen natural gas, all that stuff, you can reach him at LinkedIn or other places, email. Maybe I would just bring this to a conclusion. I personally have truly learned a lot from these fascinating presentations and discussions. As Chris mentioned, I would ask the audience, please join me in thanking the presenters for their expertise, time, effort to be here today from all their extremely busy schedule. I know we don't need to clap our hands, but the appreciation is from the bottom of my heart and from all the organizers, I can tell. If I may summarize a few key points from today's discussions or takeaways, as I said, we have reached the point of no return. We are marching towards a green energy future. It's not a simple switch, but a very complex revolution, including infrastructure, technology development, all that stuff. We are not there yet. So it's a huge amount of opportunities in front of us for the young people, for the business inclined. There's lots of things we can do. It's very exciting. Also, I feel Alberta energy industry is not going to be abandoned that soon, and we have a significant role to play, including reuse, repurpose of natural gas and heavy hydrocarbon like ash 14. Hydrogen from natural gas with the carbon capture and storage is evolving already in big business in Alberta, and it's going to be, I think, a clear, if not Alberta advantage, will be Alberta unique energy composition. The long distance transportation of hydrogen to another continent is still a big challenge. I think research is still needed. Transportation, whether you are in energy or mining or the industry, it's always the critical link for any form of energy, and either bitumen, hydrogen, or oil, no exception. Alberta is facing that challenge, and opportunities will exist for us to overcome the challenges. We also learned a lot about what China is doing. As I said, what China is doing in energy in other areas will always be closely monitored by the rest of the world, because it's the largest consumer market. And also they have some unique technologies or move things faster than the rest of the world. Sometimes they could. For example, mixing gas with hydrogen, they are doing it already. And I think it's a simple thing from a technology point of view. While oil consumption will decline, which is debatable, because if you look at India, Brazil, and many other countries, they are not onto the mobility yet. I think oil consumption may stabilize, but it's not going to increase. Of course, a lot of refineries are cutting their production. So with that, the demand for asphalt is not going to drop, and Alberta bitumen will have a potential future. If we can ship it at an ambient temperature to other places, many companies are working on it. Bryan mentioned one. I know other two companies like Canapax and Huaqing. They are all working in different ways to solidify bitumen to transport over the ocean to other countries. We also saw big technology companies like Siemens, what they are doing, and we saw China is already mixing, as I mentioned, hydrogen with natural gas. And Chris also talked about what's going on in Europe, and overall, all these presentations that give us a very good perspective of from a global point of view. I can go on and on. I'm very sure each of you will have a different point of learnings and inspiration. Overall, I think it's a very excited and encouraging. Once again, I would, on behalf of the organizers and the participants, our huge thanks to all the presenters for your time. Just a final reminder, all professional engineers and accountants, you can claim 3 or 4 hours, depends of your for professional development hours from attending this session. With that, Shiping, would you like to say the final words?
Sure. Yes, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all of our speakers for your very active participation in our forum. Our board members have also asked me to pass on their sincerest appreciation for your efforts in supporting this event. And last but not least, thank all of you members and friends for joining us. It's been such a pleasure being with all of you today. I hope you found this forum informative, valuable, and enjoyable. If you have any questions or need more information, you can visit our website, chineseprofessionals.org. Okay, thank you again and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.